59. 15 minutes later, I'd fastened my first bra. I'd taken off plenty and fondled twice as many firm breasts, but this was the first time I'd focused so hard on those little fucking hooks, my fingers fumbling as Caitlin held her breath, fidgeted and fought not to ask me again if I'd finished yet. I didn't have more than a split second to admire my handiwork before Caitlin yanked a shirt over her head and down to her hips. When she turned around, I realized I was staring at her breasts and quickly shifted my eyes to her face. "Shall we go?" she said. "Sure," I replied. I looked down for the pockets she didn't have. "Don't you need to get your wallet and phone and stuff?" Caitlin swallowed, her eyes suddenly shimmering with tears. "I don't, they took. I don't have any." Fucking fool. I stood to hug her as her tears flowed, feeling the unfamiliar firmness of a bra between us for the first time. Caitlin had always seemed so soft before. I tried to focus. "How are you going to do food shopping without any money?" I asked reasonably. "I don't know," was her muffled, miserable reply as she cried into my shirt. I sat on her bed, pulling her down with me, trying to work out what to do. I could lend her the money, sure, but that didn't fix her problem of not having a phone or access to cash. I tried to remember what I'd had to do the last time I lost my wallet. "Do you have a passport?" Caitlin sat up straighter, sniffling. "Yes." "Do you think you have any official letters for you with your home address on them?" "Maybe some from uni," she began, her eyes kindling with hope. I stood. "Tell me where to find them and we'll take them to the bank. We can arrange cash and some new cards, maybe even get you a new phone if we have time." Caitlin looked relieved. "Thanks, Nathan." Armed with her passport, some official letters and a beautifully fastened bra, if I do say so myself, Caitlin let me take her to the nearest big shopping center, Garden City. It was too far for her to walk from the car to the entrance, so I gave her 3 options. "Are you riding in a gopher, wheelchair or a shopping trolley?" Caitlin choked. "A shopping trolley? I won't fit in the child seat, Nathan." I grinned. "I know. I figured I'd lift you into the bit where the shopping's supposed to go." She still looked uncertain. "I'd prefer a wheelchair if we can get one, please." As I expected, the center had some for loan and Caitlin was soon enthroned in a wheelchair, her feet tucked up off the ground. "Right, which bank?" I asked. Caitlin smiled as she replied, "Not that one." Dealing with the bank was surprisingly easy, as Caitlin had her identification and the staff recognized her from the front cover of the day's newspaper, anyway. The photographer had captured her delighted at the duckling's smile perfectly, but the pictures of me were blurred and unrecognizable. I promised myself I'd pick up a copy I could keep before we left the shopping center. I stuck Caitlin's money in my pocket at her request, as we headed into the shopping center proper for a new wallet and the rest of what she needed. A woman almost barreled into her with a fully loaded trolley, and I heard Caitlin whimper as she dragged on the wheels to stop in time. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked the trolley woman, who glared at us as she kept going. I dropped to my knees beside Caitlin. Her hands were clasped protectively to her chest. "Are you okay?" I held out my hands for hers. She winced as she laid her fingers on mine. "I want some gloves," she said. I stared at her. "Gloves?" She curled her fingers. "You know, like cyclists use." We bought her the smallest pair of cross-training gloves we could find in a sporting goods shop, though Caitlin looked at the pale pink color of them with distaste as she slid her fingers inside. "Better?" I asked. She nodded. A wallet, handbag and basic prepaid phone later, I stopped to pick up a few new t-shirts, shorts and a pair of pajamas. Shit, I hadn't worn pajamas since I was a kid, but I'd have to if I stayed overnight at Caitlin's place or she'd freak out. I swung my bag of purchases as I asked, "Time for food shopping, or is there anything else you need?" "No, food's good," Caitlin replied and spun her wheels in the direction of the nearest supermarket. I followed her with a trolley as she made her selections. A couple of times, she smiled and nodded at people as if she knew them, but she didn't stop to talk. I watched her as she rolled down the breakfast cereal aisle, placing bets with myself on what she'd choose. I was expecting her to pick one of the boxes of kids' cereal, because of how healthy the hospital food had been, but she didn't even look at the cereal. I wondered why. When the trolley was half full, Caitlin said she was done, so we headed to the registers to pay. I grabbed a couple of newspapers from the stand as we went past, dropping them on top of the shopping. I was careful to avoid squashing the strawberries balanced precariously on top, trying to hide my smile. I'd already earned a glare and a warning when I put my jar of coffee too close to them. The checkout operator looked at me blankly as I handed over both newspapers, then turned to Caitlin. "Are you sure you want 2 papers, miss?" Caitlin looked equally blank. "Do we, Nathan?" I hesitated, then decided I had nothing to lose by telling her. "Well, you'll want one and I'd like one for myself, so yes." I nodded for the shop assistant's benefit. I pointed at the picture of Caitlin that kept catching my eye. I couldn't stop glancing at it, though I had the real lady herself right in front of me. Idly, I wondered if I could contact the newspaper photographer and get a copy of the original photo. "It's a beautiful picture, and I want to remember the first time you smiled, like none of this had ever happened. Because I was there." Caitlin looked up at me, a searching smile on her face, as if she was trying to work out if I was joking. No matter what else happened, at least she'd had one more day of happiness. And she'd shared it with me. "Nathan?" Caitlin's voice broke through my reverie. I tried to make it sound like I wasn't miles away. I started moving the shopping bags into the trolley. "Will you stay with me tonight?" She looked up at me with those big eyes. "Sure, if that's what you want," I replied. She paid the checkout operator and slipped her change into her new wallet. We headed back toward the car. "I want you to sleep with me." I choked. "You want what?" A light touch on my arm. The brush of 3 of Caitlin's fingertips was enough to stop me in my tracks. "I want you to stay and sleep with me, so you can wake me up if there are any more nightmares. Please?" I fought to get the words out. "Sleep? You mean?" Caitlin looked puzzled. "Sleep? Like you did when I was in hospital. Unless I wake you up because I'm having another nightmare." Her eyes grew huge. "You don't have to if you don't want to." Oh God, she had no idea how much I wanted to. And more than sleep. Focus. "Sure," I managed to say again. "Good thing I bought pajamas." 60. Caitlin yawned, covering her mouth with one hand. The gloves were gone. I could tell how tired she was, for she looked like a doll flung into the seat, slumped between the leather and the seatbelt with her eyes half closed. "Should we pick up a pizza on the way home?" I asked gently, glancing at her just in time to see her eyes slide shut. Caitlin's eyes shot open as she straightened in her seat. "Sure. I'm still sleepy, so it's best that I don't cook." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and handed it to her. "Here, you call your local pizza shop, so it'll be ready to pick up when we get there. You'll just have to tell me where to go." She took my phone with both hands. "What do you want?" I shrugged, slowing down to stop for a red light. "Whatever. I don't mind." She spoke in a low voice to the pizza shop while I weaved through the peak hour traffic, wishing the weary commuters wouldn't keep cutting me off as if they couldn't see my blazing red car. Maybe if I owned a different color car. Caitlin insisted on accompanying me into the pizza shop, though she leaned heavily on me every step of the way. "Caitlin." "It's been a while," said the woman behind the counter when we walked into her shop. "We all thought." The smile on Caitlin's lips melted me like ice cream. You know I always come back here. You make the best pizzas. And there's a new dessert one too." I looked at the menu. Apricots on pizza? Oh wait, those were the dessert ones. Caitlin handed over some money and the pizza woman held out the boxes with some hesitation. "I'll help carry these out to the car for you." Caitlin smiled and nodded her thanks, turning with me to head back to the car. Once I'd carefully helped her into the passenger seat, the woman deposited the pizza boxes on her lap and stood by the door of her shop to wave goodbye. Caitlin lifted a languid hand to respond. I kept throwing glances at her as we drove the short distance back to her house until I finally said, "Everyone knows you, don't they?" Her sleepy smile widened. "I've lived in this area for a while. The people in the local shops see me a lot and remember me, that's all." The smell of pizza pervaded the car, reminding me how hungry I was, but I carried Caitlin into the house before I returned for the boxes and the shopping. Caitlin ate on autopilot, swaying in her seat, she was so sleepy. I grabbed a slice from the box and bit into it without tasting it, deciding to put her food away for her. She could always shift it around when she wasn't so tired. I lifted the bag of strawberry punnets first and opened the fridge. The sharp smell of bleach fumes wafted out of the white interior, the fur seared from every surface. I coughed and wrapped the bag around them, before placing the whole package into the now pristine, cat-free crisper. Most of her purchases were frozen, packaged in portions that didn't need much preparation, I realized, as I stuck the packets in the freezer. Pre-made meals, bite-sized pieces of chicken and fish, pre-cut vegetables. Individual tubs of yogurt, fresh fruit juice and milk all went into the pungent fridge, along with a bag of grated cheese. I wished I'd looked more closely at the contents of her trolley while we were still at the shop. I'd have bought her steak and stuff I could cook for her. I wondered if she'd skipped meat because she was vegetarian, or if she had other reasons. I stared at the slice of pizza in my hand, the same as she was eating. Between the steak strips, salami and sausage, the slice scotched any thought of Caitlin being vegetarian. I looked up, wanting to ask why. Drooping over her plate at the dining table, Caitlin had managed to swallow a couple of slices, but now she was about to fall asleep in her dinner. "Hey!" I reached out to catch her before her face hit the plate. "Sorry," she mumbled. "So tired? Should put the pizza away and sleep." "I'll fridge your leftovers," I replied, straightening up and reaching for the box. "Then I can help you to bed." I stuck the remaining pizza in a plastic box before I slid it onto a fridge shelf. The smell was enough to make me close the door quickly. I turned to see her barely managing to stay on her feet, her knuckles white as she held onto the back of her chair. "Let me help you," I begged, my arms out ready to lift her up. For the second time that day, I carried Caitlin to bed. And for the second time that day she asked me to stay, so I did, stretched out on her bed beside her, waiting for her to fall asleep so I could go sleep on the couch. I closed my eyes, listening to her breathing slow into sleep, smiling. She was safe. I woke to a faint glow behind my eyelids, my nose full of a sweet smell. I breathed deeply, trying to identify the fruity scent that reminded me of soap. I opened my eyes. Oh shit. I closed them again. My face was buried in Caitlin's hair, my head resting beside hers on her pillow. She lay on her side, turned away from me, but that hadn't stopped me from sidling closer to her in sleep. I could feel the warmth of her body through my jeans, so I'd been cuddling up to her for some time. I'd even thrown an arm across her waist. Shit, I was spooning a girl I'd just slept with and sex hadn't been a part of it. Though my body definitely had ideas in that direction. Thank God I was wearing jeans instead of pajamas. It'd be harder for her to tell what I'm thinking. Fuck, this was Caitlin. I pulled away from her as stealthily as I could, not wanting to ruin a nightmare-free night by inspiring one. Not stealthy enough, Caitlin shifted as I did. Her body pressed along my side, she gave me a quick hug, then sat up. Her light lips touched my cheek and she whispered, "Thank you," before I felt her weight lift off the bed. Her bare feet patted on the timber boards as she headed down the hallway. I sat up as soon as she was out of sight. I'd slept in my clothes, so I was all set for the walk of shame to my car in front of Caitlin's whole street. It wasn't the first time I'd done such a thing, and last night had been better than most. Even without any sex. Caitlin returned, her face shiny and damp, an excited smile on her face. "Would you like breakfast?" "Sure," I replied. "Do you have any cornflakes?" Her face fell. "No. And if we do, they're so stale they'd be inedible." She walked out, one hand on the wall to steady her steps. Not sure what I'd said wrong, I hurried to follow her. I entered the kitchen just in time to see the bin lid close over the cornflake box. Caitlin's eyes were on the box and she looked angry. I opened my mouth to say the first thing that came to mind. "You really don't like cornflakes, do you?" Her hard glare turned on me. "No, I don't." She reached into the fridge and pulled out 2 yogurts, holding one out to me. "I'm right," I answered. My stomach growled a different answer. To cover the noise, I continued, "I should probably head home." Caitlin's smile was understanding. "I know. Thank you for staying." She hesitated, then went on, could you? Please, could you come over tonight and stay again? I feel safer when you're here and I'm not alone at night." Her eyes were suddenly huge. "Sure. I'll take you out for dinner tonight if you like." "I'll stay any night you want me," I replied easily without a second thought. She smiled sadly and I realized that she'd never want me. But I'd be back anyway. I waved and wished her a nice day, then climbed into my car to pick up breakfast from McDonald's on my way home. 61. I gorged on breakfast because I hadn't had hash browns in ages. I packed a bag of clothes to take to Caitlin's, then stretched out on my own couch and watched TV, calling Naveed every hour for an update on her. By the 4th phone call, he answered with, "She's fine. If you're so worried, go bother her." But Caitlin didn't expect me till the evening, so I didn't dare show up early. I had other plans. It was Tuesday when Chris had an afternoon off from university, so I waited for her to come home. I needed to know if she'd seen anything suspicious, anyone stalking her. If they weren't coming for Caitlin, they could be casing Chris. She didn't get home until almost 4, when I was starting to worry. I had my packed bag by the door ready to go, and Chris's eyes darted straight to it as she stepped inside. I opened my mouth before she could comment on it. "Chris, you haven't had anyone watching you or following you, have you? After Alana and now spending so much time with Caitlin, I'm starting to worry." I trailed off. Chris snorted. "No. Why would anyone bother stalking me?" She dropped her keys on the hall table. "What is it about that girl that has you so obsessed with her?" My reply was automatic. "She's been badly hurt and she needs my help." She snorted again, louder this time. "Yeah, you've said that before, but she's not unconscious in hospital now. And if anyone was going to try to hurt her again, they'd have done it by now. This is getting ridiculous. How well do you really know her?" I hesitated for maybe a minute, but when the words came, they flooded out. "I know how many times she still wakes up at night, screaming at the nightmares of what happened to her. I know how much she still hurts from her injuries and how hard she tries to hide it from everyone. She doesn't like strangers touching her. She hates breakfast cereal, my car, anything restrictive around her wrists, and asking anyone for help. I know by the sound of her screams whether she's afraid or in pain." I closed my eyes, trying to push the sound of Caitlin in pain out of my head. Chris was silent for a moment before she spoke. "Listen to yourself, Nathan. You're not talking about a healthy relationship. What you're saying sounds seriously fucked up. Is there anything good about her? Anything the girl actually likes?" "Thank you, Chris." The images in my head turned from dark to light. She likes strawberries, music and ducklings. And occasionally me. I felt myself smiling. I opened my eyes again. Chris shook her head. "Strawberries, music and ducklings. You know her real well, don't you?" She pressed her lips together. "Stay away from her, Nathan. That girl isn't good for you." I shook my own head. Stay away from her? I'd go crazy with worry in a day. You don't know her. Chris looked grim. Neither do you. She turned away, picked up a sponge and scrubbed the bench so hard it looked like she wanted to take the laminate off it. "Is there anything you wouldn't do for her?" she muttered, half under her breath. I wasn't sure if she'd meant me to hear that last bit, but I was too pissed off to care. Nothing Chris said could come between me and Caitlin. "Yes," I snapped. "I wouldn't die for her." Chris turned around to stare at me, her mouth hanging open. She stood there in shock for maybe half a minute before she spoke. Well, that's good," she said uncertainly. "Do you want to know why?" I asked steadily. Chris swallowed, seemingly lost for words. "That didn't happen much. Another day I'd have felt triumph, but today there was only anger. Caitlin was the key to keeping Chris alive, but today I didn't care anymore. I wouldn't die for her because I wouldn't be able to protect her anymore. What if I missed one of the people who hurt her, and my absence let them get to her? I couldn't take that risk. She's too important." I walked out of the kitchen before she replied. I'd promised Caitlin I'd be back before dark, and I didn't want to be late. Fucking paranoid, delusional, I heard Chris's voice say as I opened the front door. Not as delusional as thinking that I'm safe and no one can hurt me, I thought. There are real monsters out there. The worst part is that they're human. 62. I stood at the garage door, wishing I didn't have to drive the car Caitlin hated so much. Maybe I should sell it and buy something so different this one would only be a distant, bad memory. I looked past it and my eyes fell on the dusty cover shrouding the car beside mine. Alana's car, untouched since they took her. The car she'd never come home to drive again. My feet moved of their own volition as I reached out automatically to take the cover off. I shook my head as I saw the car. I still didn't understand our parents' reasoning behind giving me the solid, dependable sedan, while Alana got the sporty convertible. She'd never had so much as a speeding fine driving this thing, and there was no way she'd let me touch it. I touched the smooth white contours of her car, wishing she was here to say, "Don't even think about it, Nathan," as she shook her keys at me. I wished I could ask her about Caitlin, and whether she thought I was as crazy as Chris did. Would Alana have let me take her car when mine scared Caitlin so much? Or would she have told me I was being stupid and to leave the poor girl alone? I'd never know. Alana wasn't coming back, and her car would sit here gathering dust until we got rid of it. Unless I got rid of my car and kept hers. I wiped my eyes, which were tearing up in the airborne dust from shifting the car cover. I could feel my throat choking up too. The dust must have been pretty thick. I found Alana's keys and turned them in the ignition. I got nothing. It hadn't been driven in months, so a flat battery didn't come as a big surprise. I hunted around the garage for jumper leads to jumpstart her car from mine. We'd never needed them, they were still sealed in the packet. I ripped the plastic open with a pocket knife. Hooking up the cables, I started my engine, before clipping the last clamp to Alana's car battery. I slid into the driver's seat and shifted it back, so there was enough space for me, tossing the pocket knife into the glove box. This time the ignition caught, and as I revved the engine, I realized her little car had far more power than mine. Perfect Alana, never a foot wrong, to the point where our parents had trusted her with a high-powered sports car when she'd turned 21. God, I missed her. She'd have been able to tell me what to do. I turned the Mercedes off and put the cables away. I climbed back into Alana's car and headed for Caitlin's house. Maybe half a kilometer from home, I decided to take the top off. I'd never driven a convertible before, much less a topless one, and it seemed like a really good idea right now. Maybe the airflow would help clear my head, or even just the dust from my eyes which were still streaming. 5 minutes later, I could barely feel my hands in the freezing wind. When I stopped at the traffic lights, I looked around for something to wrap around me to keep warm. An old padded jacket, with a logo from an airline company that had long since gone out of business, was spread across the back seat, and I struggled to put it on before the lights went green. I managed to zip it up before I took off. I wondered who'd left the jacket in Alana's car, but I realized I'd never know. It smelled faintly of her perfume, so I knew she'd worn it in the past. Or cuddled up real close to someone who had. I laughed aloud at the thought of Alana doing anything like that in this car. She'd have insisted on dinner, a movie or a show, before even considering suggesting he provide a luxurious bed, several dates later. The exact opposite of me. I took the on-ramp to the freeway and cheered as the car responded perfectly to the accelerator. It was a heady contrast to the slow, steady speed increase of my sedan. I checked my mirrors before merging and realized my hair was standing on end, blown everywhere in the breeze that had frozen me to the bone. Caitlin would laugh herself silly, never a bad thing if I turned up with a crest like a cockatoo, but I didn't want to take her out to dinner looking like a cocky. I spotted a cap on the floor by the passenger seat and stuck it on my head, praying it would flatten my hair or at least hide it. As I pulled into Caitlin Street, I took the cap off and looked hopefully at the mirror, but was sadly disappointed. I stuck the cap back on and wondered if Caitlin would agree to order takeaway food again or let me use her bathroom to fix my hair. If I'd thought to get my hair cut, this wouldn't be a problem. Only skinheads and bald blokes should drive convertibles with the top down, I told myself, resolving to shave my head in the morning. I pulled into her driveway and checked the time. Shit, I was late. Arguing with Chris and jump-starting a car had taken more time than I thought. I saw the lace curtain at the front window move and knew Caitlin had seen me. I pulled the cap down firmly to cover my hair and took a deep breath. Caitlin flew down the steps, a look of terror on her face. She skidded to a stop in front of my car for a moment, staring. Cautiously, I opened the door and started to climb out. Her eyes widened further and she took off down the street. I looked around, but I couldn't see what had scared her so much. I expected her to come back, but Caitlin kept going, as if someone was pursuing her. I broke into a run too, determined to catch up to her so I could keep her in sight. If someone was after her, I had to stay with her to protect her. It had been too long since I'd last gone for a run. I couldn't catch my breath, but she was visibly flagging as she reached the end of her endurance. I was amazed she'd made it this distance from the house, and I worried that Caitlin would push her body too far, doing herself even more injury. She almost tripped, then righted herself before she hit the ground. "No, stop," I begged her breathlessly. "Come back. You can't." I meant to say she couldn't run far, but it seemed fear had driven her to do just that. "Can't outrun me," I finished. That was true at least. And I didn't want her to try. "Come back. Please. Let me." She made a fearful sound in her throat and I redoubled my speed, desperate to catch up, stop her and find out why she was so frightened. I reached out desperately, trying to grab her shoulder. As my fingers touched her, she overbalanced, falling face first onto the lawn of a stranger's house. As soon as Caitlin hit the grass, she rolled over to face me, the tears in her eyes set on fire by the light of the setting sun. She let out a sobbing breath, her hands up as if to stop me from coming any closer. My heart was already pounding from panic and the unaccustomed exercise. I felt it drop like Caitlin had when she'd fallen. "Angel, are you okay?" I asked, expecting the worst and hoping I was wrong. A curtain in the house twitched and the front door opened. An angry-looking woman peered out of the partly open door, a hockey stick in her hand. Caitlin's sobbing resolved into words. "How could why?" I tried to smile, but it was hard. I wanted desperately to know what had scared her, but I didn't dare ask with an angry audience. "What do you think of my new car?" I asked, seeing movement around me as more of her neighbors emerged from their houses. I wondered which one held the piano-playing child. Most of them were armed with sporting equipment. I saw a couple more hockey sticks, some cricket bats and a tennis racket. One bloke carried a massive axe that I hoped stayed on his side of the street, as far away from us as possible. "Your new car?" Caitlin managed to say. "Yes," I replied patiently, glancing around. All of them seemed content to watch for the moment. "I know you didn't like the old one, so I figured it was time for something new. Forgive me, Alana, but I'd drive a hot pink hatchback if it meant Caitlin wouldn't be so scared. You don't need your car anymore." She glanced around at the neighbors and lifted her lips in a forced smile. "The car's fine. Please help me up and back to my house." She lifted her arms, looking up at me with a wide-eyed, desperate smile on her face. I tried to lift her up, but she muttered, "Just help me walk." "But you'll hurt yourself," I protested. "That's too far for you to walk." Her smile was strained. "I got this far on my own, didn't I?" "Do it, Nathan. All my neighbors will interfere, and they're fairly protective of me when Dad's not around. Especially now." Against my best judgment, I helped her stand up, taking as much of her weight as I could as I helped her walk home, knowing I'd have nightmares about her tooth-grinding smile after this. Her face was almost drained of all color by the time she staggered up the steps to her front door. Even with me holding her, she was swaying on her feet. "Nathan, please, the door," she panted. She looked like she was going to pass out. I turned the handle and kicked it open, lifting Caitlin off her feet before she fell. "No, must," she murmured, her eyes closed. "You must rest," I finished for her, carrying her over the threshold like my precious bride. At least the precious part was true. I let her down onto the couch, where she sat with her eyes closed, unmoving for a few minutes. I stood beside her, watching. I took my cap off, not caring how crazy a cockie's crest I had anymore. I ran my fingers through it absently, probably making it worse. I waited for her to catch her breath, for her eyelids to flutter open so I could ask her what had scared her so much and take care of it for her. But they didn't. Her breathing was shallow and slow. I knelt down beside her. "Angel," I began. "What is it, Nathan?" Her voice was flat but calm. "Are you okay?" I asked, desperate to know. A pause. "Not really. I'm hurting and hoping the pain will go away if I sit still long enough." "Oh God," I burst out. "I'm so sorry I was late. What happened?" Someone pounded on the door. I looked at Caitlin, unsure what to do. She opened her eyes and struggled to sit up, but she didn't move much. She nodded toward the door. "Please?" I stood and opened the door. My least favorite of her neighbors stood there, the bloke with the block splitter. The heavy axe didn't seem to be in his hands anymore. I breathed a sigh of relief until I realized he'd propped it up beside the door, so he had his hands free to knock. "Fuck. Can I help you?" I asked nervously. Behind him, I could see people still on their front lawns, watching. "I want to make sure Caitlin's okay," he said, looking me right in the eye. "Me too, mate," I replied. "It's okay, Nathan," Caitlin said behind me. I felt her hand on my arm and moved aside quickly, grabbing her before she collapsed. I held her to my side, trying to make it look friendly instead of forced by her frailty. "Thanks for coming to check on me, Bruce, but my friend Nathan's here to help me. I fell over and I think I hurt something. I'll be okay. I just need to rest a bit." Her body was threatening to make her rest right here on the floor if I let go. I managed a smile for her nosy, scary neighbor. "If you say so," Bruce replied doubtfully. "If you need me for anything, all you have to do is ask. You have our number." He eyed me as he picked up his block splitter, swinging it up onto his shoulder as he walked back across the road to his own house. I carried Caitlin back to the couch before I closed and locked the door. This time I sat beside her. "What happened?" I repeated urgently. She smiled tiredly. "Nothing. Nothing." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Is there any chance we can go out for dinner another night? I'm a little too tired and you look like a cockatoo." I laughed, relieved. "Sure. I'll ring up and get something delivered." She reached out, her hand patting my arm. "Thank you." The patting stopped, her hand resting limply on my wrist. I looked at her in concern. Poor Caitlin had passed out. 63. I waited a moment, calling her name softly, but I got no response. Even when I stroked her hair, she didn't move. I stretched Caitlin out on her side on the sofa, checking her breathing and all those things you do for first aid on an unconscious person. As I touched her legs, she whimpered slightly, so I moved away. I dug out her pain medication and placed it on the coffee table beside her with a glass of water. Not sure how long it had been since she'd eaten, I washed and sliced up some strawberries for her. I left them on the coffee table too. It had been a long time since my initial first aid training, but I was pretty sure I had one more step to follow. I pulled out my phone to call for help from an expert more qualified than I was. "Why'd you put her to sleep on the couch? Wouldn't she be more comfortable in her own bed?" Naveed asked, without so much as a hello. She's unconscious, not asleep, I replied, annoyed. Look, I need to know what happened to scare her before I arrived. I'm trying to work out whether I should call an ambulance or if she'll be better off staying home, where I can let her wake up normally. Nothing, mate, Naveed drawled. I could imagine him leaning back and stretching out in his seat as he said it. She was sitting pretty much where she is now, watching TV, before she noticed something outside. She used the remote control to turn the TV off and went to the window. She stood there for maybe a split second, then went out the front door. Whatever scared her wasn't in the house, it was outside with you. So whatever it was, you must have seen it too. I racked my brains but came up with nothing. The neighbors hadn't been in sight until I started following Caitlin as she sprinted down the street. I shook my head. I saw nothing dangerous outside. I don't know. Naveed laughed. Maybe she's afraid of you, mate. I joined in his laughter. Yeah, right. Caitlin's not scared of me. Maybe I'll ask her again when she's awake. You keep an eye out, right? Make sure we have outside cameras too, just in case. I ended the call. It felt weird not saying goodbye, but I could wave at the cameras if I wanted to. I checked Caitlin's breathing and pulse again. Her breathing was even and her pulse was fine. It was like she was asleep instead of unconscious, worn out from walking and running too far. I wouldn't let her do it again. I'd lift her up and carry her, no matter what she said. For the first time, I noticed she was wearing lipstick, a deep moist red that was the same color as the strawberries I'd sliced. I stared at her strawberries, magnified by the glass of water to an obscene size. I wanted a taste, just one, to see if they really were as amazing as I'd hoped, but I didn't dare. Not without asking Caitlin first. I sat in the armchair beside Caitlin, wondering if I could turn the TV on without disturbing her. I decided it didn't matter. Even if she did wake up, there was no way I'd let her do anything but rest. My mind wandered as some inane TV show played in the background, the voices a vague buzz behind my busier thoughts, wondering what Caitlin had seen that I hadn't. Nathan? Caitlin asked softly. I sat up, suddenly alert. Reaching for the bowl of strawberries, one held them out to her. Here, eat something so you can take pain medication to help you. She took the bowl with both hands and a smile. Thank you. She popped a strawberry into her mouth. I watched, mesmerized by the red on red. Don't even think it. 64. Little bitch. Loud shadow in the doorway. Flipped him the finger. Scared, determined to fight. Biting, kicking, punching, scratching. Half my face on fire, flying. Landing heavily. Taste of blood, hurt to breathe. Broken ribs. Him on top of me. Slamming my face into the floor. Not her face. Need her pretty. Raked my nails down his arm. Broke my fingers. Both the middle ones. So I could never say up yours to him again. Fuck you instead then. Arms twisting. Fighting not to scream. Tied me up. Glint of a knife in the dim light. Sliced at my clothes. Cut me too. Didn't care. It's okay, Angel. A bad dream. You're safe at home. Broke my fingers. I have to write it down while I still remember. Are you sure it can't wait till morning? No, it's a short one, I'll do it now. Do you need my help? Don't worry about it, Nathan. You don't need to hear horrible stuff like this. I won't be long, go back to sleep. I will soon too. 65. Right, time to go to your physio appointment, I said, slipping an arm under her knees and another behind her back, so I could lift Caitlin from her seat. The early morning sun shone brightly through the window behind me, casting my shadow over her. Put me down. Her voice was cold with fury as she struggled. Agoraphobia, I thought, as I hesitated. She didn't want to leave the house now. Now Nathan." She'd never used this tone on me before, I'd only heard it in her nightmares. I did as I was told, reseating her on the couch. I crouched in front of her, trying to meet her eyes as I spoke. "Angel, I'm only trying to help you. Everyone's trying to help you. The doctors, the physio, even me. I want to help you." She hooked her arms around my neck, her face so close, looking into my eyes. She cut me off mid-sentence. "If you want to help me so much, don't carry me. Help me to walk. But yesterday you hurt yourself. You shouldn't overdo it, and I can't stand to see you in pain like that." "I'll walk on my own damn feet or I'm not going," she insisted. Unwillingly, I helped her to her feet. My arm around her waist, her arm around my shoulder. I watched her face, that look of fierce determination, then the pain she battled to hide as she took a step. I looked away, unable to watch. I was helping her hurt herself. Again. Oh God. Out the front door, down the steps, down the driveway to my car. Small steps, slow steps, but she was almost there. Maybe 2 meters from the car, she stopped, swung her body around and clung to me. Now I couldn't help but see the tears streaming down her face. "I can't," she gasped. "It hurts too much." Now I thought she'd let me lift her up and carry her the rest of the way. I leaned down to sweep her legs up, but Caitlin moved closer to me so I couldn't. "They've taken everything from me. I can't even walk. Walk to the car." Her voice came out sounding slightly hysterical. I turned her around carefully to face the front door. "They didn't take anything from you. Look how far you've come. Tomorrow you'll get further. You get better every day. They're not here. They can't get anywhere near you. It's like you keep saying. Keep fighting. Don't let them win now." She relaxed and wiped her eyes with her fingers. "Thank you." Her arms wrapped around me in a brief hug of gratitude that was over before I was aware of what she was doing. Then she gritted her teeth, clutching my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin, and took those last agonizing steps to the car. I felt the tiny trickle of my own warm blood as it crept down my arm, but I didn't make a sound. Caitlin was hurting worse than I was, and she'd pass out from the pain before she'd permit the scream to escape her teeth. How could I do any less? 66. When we arrived back at her house, it was immediately apparent that something was wrong. Her front door was slightly open. I knew I'd pulled it shut and locked it behind me when we'd left, yet now it was ajar. I left Caitlin in the car while I looked over the fence into the garage. There were no cars there, but the back gate was wide open. I wanted to go around to the back of her house to investigate, but I didn't want to leave her alone and unprotected either. Whoever had left her front door and gate open might still be here. As if she'd read my mind, Caitlin called, "We should phone the police. I don't want to go in unless it's safe." I glanced back at her, sitting in the passenger seat with the door open. Her feet were on the door frame, as if she was afraid to step out of the car. She hugged her knees to her chest, her face pale and her expression frightened. She needed me. The house could wait until I had some help, I decided as I crossed the driveway to stand beside her, pulling my phone out of my pocket. I wanted to call one of our teams or at least Naveed, but I couldn't with Caitlin so close by. So I did as she suggested and dialed the police. As the phone started to ring, I reached for her hand with my spare one. I saw the glint of sun on metal as something fell from her hand and plinked to the paving. Her fingers cautiously grasped mine as I recognized the pocket knife I kept in the glove box, now lying open on the ground beneath the car. When did she pull the knife from the glove box? How did she even know it was there? What was she going to do with it? I stared at her for a moment, torn between panic and curiosity. She looked up at me, so trusting, and I had to drag my attention away from her to focus on what the woman on the other end of the phone line was saying. We didn't wait long before a police car was in the driveway. 2 male officers got out and approached the front door. "Have you been inside yet?" he asked us, and I shook my head. The one who hadn't spoken pulled out a boxy item that I assumed was a taser, but the other kept his hands free as he pushed her front door open with his shoulder. Caitlin shivered despite the warm day as both police officers moved out of sight into her house. I crouched in the driveway and slid an arm around her shoulders. She leaned in closer to me, her eyes fixed on her front door now wide open. It was less than 10 minutes before the police officers re-emerged from her house, but the wait felt interminable. From the doorstep the talkative one called out, "You can come in." "There's no one else here," as the quiet one went around to the garage and through the open back gate, looking thoughtful. Caitlin didn't move. She looked too stunned to protest, so I lifted her out of the car and carried her into the house. She closed her eyes as we entered the lounge room, but after a few seconds her eyes were open again, looking for some evidence of what the intruders had done. I saw nothing different, so I put her down in an armchair before sitting in the chair closest to her. She kicked her shoes off almost immediately, bringing her knees up to curl into a little ball where she sat. The talkative police officer pulled up a straight-backed dining chair from the next room and plonked himself down in it, across from us. Behind him, the smashed sliding door lay in pieces on the floor, except for a few jagged shards up the top. A brick that I'd seen by the back gate, presumably used to prop it open, sat on top of the broken glass. "Well, I can see how they got in, and they left by the front door," I thought, eyeing the mess on the floor of Caitlin's kitchen. I moved my gaze from the room behind him to the police officer himself. He was close enough for me to read his name badge now, which read David. I squinted at the large number of letters in his last name, but failed to make any sense of what they spelled out before he spoke. He had a handheld tablet out, stylus ready. He didn't ask for our names, so he must have known who we were already. "So you arrived how long before you called the police?" Caitlin was silent, so I shrugged and said, 5 minutes or less." "How long were you gone?" He looked at Caitlin as he said it, but she didn't say a word. I spoke up. "We left the house maybe 2 hours ago." He wrote something down before looking at Caitlin again. "Can you tell me if anything is missing?" I opened my mouth to answer this too, but Caitlin beat me to it. She uncurled from her fetal position, planting her feet on the floor and leaning toward him. "How do you expect me to know that, when I wasn't stupid enough to go into the house until I knew the intruder was gone?" Both of us were stunned by her angry outburst. Before I could react, she pushed herself out of her chair and strode over to the kitchen table. She surveyed the broken glass on the floor, gripping the table for support. She shook her head, then turned, gritting her teeth, and walked past us through the lounge room to the bedrooms. I leapt to my feet to help her as she went past me, but she shrugged off my hand with a shake of her head and kept walking. I followed close behind, Officer David with the long last name a few steps behind me. The doors to all the other rooms were shut. The only open door was the one to her bedroom, so that's where she headed. Her wardrobe doors were open and so were all her drawers. There were clothes everywhere, as if they'd been looking for something. On her bed, on top of the mess of clothes, lay a big knife and a matching pair of scissors I recognized from her kitchen. She went to the wardrobe first, opening the doors wide. A blue dress hung at an odd angle, stopping the doors from closing properly. She reached up to push the hanger back into the wardrobe, but the dress slid right off it, puddling at her feet. She reached down and held it up. The sound that came out of her mouth was halfway between a sob and a yowl. The dress was slashed down the front in several places, so the fabric hung in tattered ribbons. If she ever wore the dress in its current state, it'd leave less to the imagination than her scanty hospital gown had. I picked up a pair of pants on the bed, which looked like they'd been slashed with scissors. The entire crotch of the pants was cut out, from the waistband at the front all the way to the back. I dropped them again quickly before Caitlin could see them. She started pulling items out of the wardrobe one at a time, dropping them on the floor. Dresses, shirts, pants, skirts, almost everything she touched had been a victim of knife or scissors. I edged away from the bed and bumped into the chest of drawers beside it. The top drawer was wide open, with something lacy hacked into pieces on top. Unable to help myself, I lifted the mess of white lace up for a better look. From the little that remained, it looked like they had once been a bra and matching knickers. Now they looked like some white elastic with scraps of lace dangling off at odd angles. What I'd give to have seen her in these when they were still intact. The police officer stared at me, not saying a word, though he evidently wanted to say a few things. I dropped the ruined underwear back in the drawer. Caitlin backed away from the wardrobe and sat down heavily on the bed, taking stock of the destroyed clothing strewn across it. I stumbled through the clothes on the floor to the passage outside, and made it to the bathroom. In my mind's eye, I saw the drawer full of shredded lace and wondered why they'd come in and shred her clothes, but leave before she came home. The silent police officer stood in the open bathroom doorway. He moved aside when I approached. My eyes went to the floor of the bathroom first, but the only clothes were the pajamas Caitlin had left there this morning when she'd taken a shower. They looked untouched. I closed my eyes and splashed water on my face, grabbing a towel to dry myself where I stood. So I was standing in front of the mirror when I opened my eyes to see my reflection was obscured by lipstick smeared across the reflective surface. 4 words in bright red capitals. Fuck you. Little bitch. What remained of the lipstick was on the bench beside the basin, next to a box of Caitlin's makeup that I'd never seen her use. The lipstick looked like the one she'd worn only last night. When it had graced her lips, it had reminded me of strawberries. Scrawled across her mirror, now it looked more like blood. When I turned to meet the eyes of the silent police officer, I was more confused than ever. The bastards who hurt Caitlin weren't likely to cut up her clothes and make a mess of her bathroom mirror. Any message they'd have for her would be vocal, physical and brutal. Any red marks left in the house would have been drawn in her blood. The officer looked grim. There's a woman out there who really hates your girlfriend. She should watch out. A woman? Who hated her more than those bastards? I found that hard to imagine until I remembered. When his wife heard what had happened to him, she was very distraught. Her name was Laura. The dead bastard had a wife. I wonder if she knew what he was really doing. She was little and pretty, with short dark hair. The woman driver, who spoke to Caitlin before she hit her and pushed her into the car, had short dark hair. What if the bastard's wife not only knew what he was doing, but she'd helped him? She'd be pretty pissed off, especially if she thought Caitlin had killed her husband. I stared at the police officer in horror for a moment, before pushing past him to hurry back to Caitlin. I stood in the doorway of her room, hesitating. She still sat on the bed, not touching any of the clothes. She'd clenched her hands into fists and her teeth bit so deep into her lip I hoped she wasn't bleeding. She was fighting so hard not to cry, with Officer David with the impossible last name's eyes on her. She didn't trust police officers, not after one of them shot her. Oh shit. I'd left her alone with one. He left the room as I entered it, murmuring something about filing a report and how he'd be in contact soon. He handed me a slip of paper, telling me it was for insurance. Caitlin nodded numbly. I shoved the damaged clothes into a pile on one side of the bed, away from her, and sat beside her in the space I'd made. I cautiously slid my arm around her shoulders and tried to pull her closer, but she wouldn't budge. We'll get you an alarm system and security guards. I told her, dropping my voice to a whisper. I won't let her hurt you. Still she sat ramrod straight, her whole body tense, and I wondered if she was going to push me away or even hit me. She seemed angry enough to do anything, even if it would hurt her later when she calmed down. Shit, I was worried that she was going to hit me, not because I might get hurt, but because she might hurt her hand and need an ice pack. I suddenly remembered the knife she'd held in the car. Had she left it there? Where were the knife and scissors? I looked around the bed for them, but I couldn't see them. On the edge of panic, I tried to pull her toward me again. I won't let them hurt you, I promised her again. I'll even take you shopping to buy more clothes to replace these. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. Her hand groped for something behind me. I prayed that it wasn't something sharp, before her tears spilled over. What would the woman who did this to an entire wardrobe of clothes do to Caitlin if she got her hands on her? I realized suddenly, my arms tightening protectively around Caitlin. Nothing. Nothing. I wouldn't let her. Her tears were short-lived this time. It seemed only a couple of minutes before Caitlin sat up again, something still clenched in her right hand. She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, sniffling. Did she get to the dirty clothes in the laundry? I thought about the untouched pajamas on the bathroom floor. I don't know, but I doubt it. She stood up, a little shakily. Then I better go do some washing before I get a rubbish bag for all this. As she walked away with small, careful steps, leaning against the walls and furniture where she could, I noticed her hands were empty. I watched her until she was out of sight down the passage, before I looked to see what she'd been so quick to grab and keep hidden from me. On the clear patch of the bed where she'd been sitting was a crumpled ball of shredded black satin and lace. I smoothed out the remains of the slashed G-string and felt my face grow hot. Oh God, I just agreed to take her shopping for sexy underwear. Don't think about it. Make some phone calls. Check with whoever's on surveillance to see if it was Laura. Keep her safe till tomorrow and then worry about how I'd manage to go underwear shopping with her without being a blind eunuch with a preference for guys. Fuck. 67. Knocked out or just asleep? Still dark. Chris. The only name they gave me. Tied up, restraining wrists and ankles. Someone else here? Water. Sipping slowly, swallowing painfully. Let me go. Help me, you bastard. Give me a weapon so I can hurt them, kill them. No. Tears. Pills. Hurt. Hell yes. A sip, a swallow. Silence. Won't let them win. 68. Please don't let them. Fuck. Another one. The nightmares had started maybe an hour after Caitlin had fallen asleep, and this was the third time tonight. Hell, it wasn't even midnight yet. I'm here. I won't let them hurt you, I murmured. I smoothed my pajamas, making sure they covered as much of me as possible. I had to be so careful. If it weren't for Caitlin, I wouldn't even own pajamas. She owned very little in the way of clothing now. In the end, I'd had to bag up all her ruined clothes before putting them in the rubbish bin. Caitlin's tears had been more than I could take. Her wardrobe was as bare as one in a hotel room, no more than that. Even hotel wardrobes had bathrobes. Hers was sliced into so many pieces I'd had to vacuum some of them up. I moved closer to Caitlin, every movement controlled as I pulled her into a hug. It's okay. They're not here. It's over now, just a dream. I felt her relax. Nathan? That's right. Just us here, no one else. You're safe at home. I loosened my hold on her. They? I know. Just a dream. It's okay. I took a breath and let it out slowly as I let go of her. Try to get back to sleep, okay? Okay. The bed springs crunched lightly as they compressed under her shifting weight. I sighed and shifted so my head was back on my own pillow. The clock read 11:46. I wondered how long it would be before the next nightmare as I slid into sleep. Let me go, you bastard. 1:03. Oh shit, it was this one. Don't touch her till she's awake. No one but you and I here, Angel. No one's got you. They can't hurt you anymore. I spoke at normal volume, hoping to wake her with only my voice. I didn't want her clawing at my face again. I said, let me go, loser. Her voice rose. Fuck. The neighbors were going to hear this one if I didn't wake her up soon. I touched her shoulder lightly. Caitlin, it's Nathan. You're safe. I swear you're safe. She turned on me and I felt her nails rake my cheek as I pulled away too slowly. I caught her hands in mine as carefully as I could. She dug her nails into my palm. Let me go, she insisted, trying to pull her hands out of my grasp. Wake up, Angel. No one's hurting you, least of all me. Come on, you know who I am. I shifted away from her, letting go of her hands. Just another nightmare, Caitlin. My heart ached for her as I touched my hand to my cheek, relieved to find I wasn't bleeding, though that also meant she wasn't strong enough yet. Almost. A gasp and a sob. Nathan? Please? Thank God. I moved quickly to her side again and held out my arms to her. She burrowed her face into the buttons on my chest and I felt the thin cotton soak through with her tears. Wouldn't help me. So much pain and no help, bastard. I heard the words that were muffled by my pajamas. I sighed in relief. I'm here now and I'm helping you. No one's going to hurt you again, I swear. Definitely not her. Caitlin pulled away, sniffling. She stretched out, resting her head on her pillow again. Sorry. Thanks, Nathan. I was slower to relax back into repose. My cheek stung but my eyes still closed. Who do you think you are? Her angry voice woke me again. I prayed that the dream wouldn't go any further. Took my clothes, she wailed. Fuck. I opened my eyes. 2:14. Here we go again. No sleep for the wicked, or the rest of us either. 69. Hello, Caitlin's voice said softly behind the curtain. I'm here, I answered from the chair outside beside a rack of stringy satin and lace. If I didn't look too closely at the lingerie beside me, didn't think about how little Caitlin was wearing and firmly focused on the memory of her broken fingers covered in blood on the beach, I could almost keep it together. She stuck her head out, clutching at the curtain so it didn't reveal anything I really didn't need to see, except her bare shoulder. Is the shop assistant there? I need help and I don't know how much longer I can stand up. She swallowed, looking worried. The dark circles under her eyes only served to make them look bigger and sadder. I crossed to the entrance of the change rooms and looked. The music over the shop speakers was a lot louder out here, but it didn't improve the perky pop song any. The teenage sales assistant was busy with a couple of giggling teenage customers, so she ignored my frantic waving. Maybe she just didn't hear me over the loud music. I headed back in to Caitlin. Grabbing the chair I'd been sitting in, I said, "She's busy. I can help if you like." I held out the chair so its outline took shape through the curtain. "First you should sit down." I slid it through the gap, closing my eyes until I felt her take the chair from me. "Thank you," Caitlin replied. She took a deep breath like she needed to say more. "But I still need help with fastening things," she finished in a rush. "Fuck. I'll go see if she's free," I told her as I headed for the entrance again. The giggly girls continued to ignore me. I returned. "Sorry, Angel, she's not. Can I help?" I could hear her breathing, but she didn't reply for a few slow breaths. "You remember how you helped me get dressed this morning?" I laughed. "Of course, Angel. I'll close my eyes or keep my eyes down the whole time. Don't you worry. Think horrible thoughts. Twisted broken fingers. The gunshot wound in her leg bleeding onto the road. Keep a blank face." I slipped behind the change room curtain, my eyes on the grey carpet. A quick glance up told me Caitlin was sitting sideways in the chair, resting her arm on the back of it, so she had her back to me. As long as I stayed behind her, I might manage not to stare at anything she didn't want me to see. Of course, I wasn't counting on the surrounding mirrors, making sure even the slightest glance gave me a panoramic view. She held out the back of her bra. I sighed and started on those little hooks. One, then the other one. Oh shit, now the first one again. I hated these bloody. Done. I risked a glance up. Strawberry red satin lifting a lovely cleavage. I closed my eyes. Not strawberries. Think of blood. "Nathan, could you?" I opened my eyes. I didn't have to, I could undo her bra with my eyes closed. I kept my eyes on her back while she slipped the red one off and pulled something black on instead. Smooth skin, marred only slightly by the pink and white patches where her ulcers had been. Healing rapidly, she'd already recovered so much. Far from the shadow of herself that I'd seen stretched out on the sand, she was every bit as real and vibrant as the angel I saw tripping down the terrace. I wanted to. Nathan? Black hooks on black satin. I tried to focus on that bit, not the curve of black lace tempting me in the mirror. Think of her screaming in the dark when there was nothing I could do to calm her down. I could feel my face wincing at the memory. Please? Pink and patterned, the swell of skin above them like the top of a tight-fitting corset. Pink like the scars on her ankles, where I'd had to peel the bloodied rope away. Black and white stripes cutting into her flesh like a knife blade about to pierce the skin. Blood red with black edging, like an encrustation of fresh and dried blood on her skin as she lay barely conscious on the sand. Plain black satin, as dark as the inside of a nightmare when I couldn't stop her from screaming. White satin, pure and pale like her face had been on the beach when I thought she was dead. "Can I help you with anything?" the salesgirl asked behind me, treading on my foot as it stuck out behind the curtain. "Oh, thank God," I blurted out as relief rushed over me. I wouldn't have to conjure up any more horrible memories of Caitlin's injuries to stop myself thinking about her in her underwear. A sharp intake of breath and I dared to open my eyes. Caitlin's reflection stared at me, looking shocked and hurt. Instead of a new bra, she wore a silky little black nightdress, and she looked nothing short of incredible. It hurt to look at her, close enough to touch and yet untouchable. "Miss, are you okay in there?" the salesgirl asked, sticking her head inside the curtain. She squinted suspiciously at me, kneeling behind Caitlin. "Fine," Caitlin said absently, whisking a tear off her cheek before the girl saw it. She reached for the hangers, laden with what she'd tried on. "I'll take these ones with the matching knickers, all in small." She split the pile and handed a small stack to her, the strawberry red one on top. "And you can keep these." The larger pile went to the girl's other hand. The girl didn't move, still gaping at me. "He's helping me," Caitlin said angrily. "Now let me get changed into my clothes." The salesgirl opened her mouth like a flustered fish as she backed out and left. Good riddance. I looked at Caitlin, who gazed pointedly back at me. I closed my eyes and heard the rustle of satin as she took the nightdress off. "You looked beautiful in that one," I said suddenly, feeling like I had to say something. Caitlin didn't say anything until she needed my help. "One last bra please, Nathan." I fastened it fairly quickly this time. I was getting the hang of those bloody hooks. Deep purple satin, the color of a blossoming bruise. Fuck. Satin draped over her arm, Caitlin left the change room as soon as she was dressed, while I struggled to my feet and stumbled along behind her. She laid the nightdress on the counter. "This one too." I wanted to apologize. I wanted to explain. Most of all, I wanted to see her wear any of her new purchases without having to dredge up horrific thoughts. I wondered if there'd ever be a day I could think about her body without imagining blood. I didn't have a hope in hell. 70. My phone vibrated, not quite silent. The screen glowed brighter than anything else I could see, for it was almost dark. Caitlin wasn't within earshot, so I answered it. Naveed's voice was panicked. "They're almost there, just coming into sight of her house. It's too late to get her out, and it's now or never. Get her hidden. Our team are still on their way. Get geared up and stick your earpiece in now." "As soon as Caitlin's safe," I replied, my heart plummeting at the thought that she was in danger. "Just don't waste time. They're coming and backup won't be here in time to stop them from reaching you." "How many?" I asked urgently. 3 men, came the answer. No sign of her. "Shit. I'll take care of it. Let them in. Talk to you soon." I hung up. I knew she was in the toilet, but I couldn't wait. Perhaps this was the best place to hide her and she'd be safe. I had a million thoughts running through my mind, but I couldn't focus when I considered the possibility that she might not survive. I couldn't think it, and I didn't want to. I heard the sound of cascading water and burst in, almost knocking her down with the door. She looked stunned as she tried to regain her balance, but I shoved my body up against hers, pinning her to the wall, as I kicked the door shut behind me. My shirt slid over warm black satin with a froth of white lace at the top, highlighting the cleavage it made no attempt to hide. Oh God, she was wearing the new little nightdress. I dragged my eyes from her lace to her face. A face full of raw terror and panic that I'd do anything to wipe clean. Her eyes didn't leave mine before she whispered imploringly, "Nathan, please, don't hurt me," as Caitlin closed her eyes. Surrendering. No. Painfully, I was reminded of her lying on the beach, and that moment when I'd thought she was dead. My heart contracted in my chest, aching for her, as I thought about how lost I'd be if anyone hurt her. If I lost her tonight. I tried to reassure her. "It's okay. You're safe," I lied through my teeth, knowing she didn't believe me. I could feel her heart beating fast under my hand, reminding me that she was still alive. "I'm not going to hurt you," I murmured. "Fuck. Let them hurt you." Not going to let them hurt you. Surely she knew by now that I'd never hurt her. Her eyes stayed closed. She opened her mouth to draw a deep, shaky breath. I moved almost by instinct. There was no thought. I just looked at her face, her lips, her closed eyes, and touched my lips to hers. She stiffened and her eyes flew open. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with hurt and betrayal, as if she didn't know me as well she might. Like I reminded her of them. I broke away from her. "I'm sorry." "Chris," she breathed, confirming my fears. She brought her knee up between my legs as hard as she could. "You prick," she hissed in my ear as I doubled over. "You did that before and you hoped I wouldn't remember." She tried to shove past me, but even in my haze of pain I remembered why I'd cornered her in here in the first place. She's getting stronger, I realized. If I could keep her alive past tonight, she'd recover. My heart leaped at the thought. "I need you to stay here. The security guards told me there are people outside your house and I need you to hide in here, where no one will guess you are. Just until the police arrive." I pushed her into the corner, pressing her shoulders toward the floor. Her cheek pressed against the trickling cistern, her dry eyes were both furious and terrified as she looked up at me. "You can't leave me here alone, give me something to defend myself with or stay here with me." Her hands were curled into fists and so were her bare toes, she was so angry. I wavered, wanting to stay. "No, don't think of that night on the beach. Concentrate on keeping her alive." Struggling to keep my focus, I crouched in front of her. "I can't. They might have seen me come in here. If I stay here and they come into the house before the police arrive, this is the first place they'll look, because they know I'll be here. Then they'll find you too." She bit her lip and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her eyes held mine. No longer terrified, she'd harnessed the fury. "Fuck. Make sure you kill them all," she told me through gritted teeth. "None of the people who hurt me deserves to live." I nodded once. It felt like forever, but barely a minute had passed, the time it took for the cistern to fill, ready to flush again. I had to get out of there to keep her safe. I opened the door and pretended to zip up my fly as I shut the door behind me. I ran for her bedroom, praying I'd have time to get my vest on and some extra clips for my standard-issue semi-automatic before they arrived. The rip of Velcro as I fastened the vest as fast as I could. Spare clips shoved in every available pocket. A loaded gun in my hands. Please just let her survive till tomorrow. Would I? I wondered as I fumbled to fit the earpiece in place. "Time's up," said a voice in my ear. I jumped a mile before I realized I was alone. The voice was Naveed's. "Coming through the kitchen now? Ready?" "No." Nevertheless, I nodded. "Now or never. I need to end this. Don't let her die." 71. Rounding the corner, you should see him in 5-4. Naveed's voice buzzed in my earpiece. I heard him before I saw him, so when he rounded the corner he met the muzzle of my gun in his face. He backed up a little and his hands went up too. He didn't even have a weapon out. "Which one are you?" I asked roughly. "I'm Pete," he said through his nose. "What did you do to Caitlin?" I demanded. "The little girl?" He grinned lazily. "I fucked her more times than I could count. Broke her fingers too when she tried to fight me. She screamed real sweet then." Caitlin screaming. Nothing sweet about that. The sound of her screaming still echoing in my head, I shot the smile off his face. Okay, I shot off most of his face. The dead body crumpled to the carpet. One down. I felt nothing but a grim satisfaction. "Fuck, Nathan. Alive?" I nodded, knowing Naveed could see me through the surveillance cameras. I'd try harder to resist killing the next one if I could. Leaving the kitchen now, he's headed into the lounge. I stepped over the corpse and carefully continued up the passage. The cleanup crew could deal with it later. I crept up on the next one from behind, my gun to the back of his head, as he leaned over to look under a table. "Which one are you?" A snort as he straightened. "I was Senior Constable Nick Dennis, before I got suspended after meeting you and your girlfriend." "What did you do to her?" He grunted. "Nothing. It's what she'll do to you that matters." I jabbed him with the gun. "What Caitlin will do to me?" He snorted again. "Laura, fuckwit. It doesn't matter where you go or what you do, she'll find you and fuck you up worse than the little girl who killed her husband." "Tell me where to find her," I said urgently. "I can get you into protective custody." He let out a bark of laughter. "Not from her you can't. She'll pay whatever it takes to get whatever she wants. I'll lose my job as it is, I almost did when I shot you and her. Are you gonna shoot me?" I pulled the gun back a little so it wasn't pressed against his skull. "Maybe not if you tell me where I can find her." More laughter. "She'll find you and you'll wish she hadn't." "Not me, mate." He lifted his own weapon. The barrel pointed at me over his shoulder and I ducked to the side. I was just in time to miss the shower of blood and brain that blew out the back of his head as he killed himself. Instead, I felt nothing. Number 3, in the bush with the red flowers. "Unconscious is fine but we need him alive." "Do you want to do this?" I muttered. "I'll take your place in the van." "Love to, mate, but you know Sam will kill me if I don't come home in the morning. I have to pick up nappies on my way home." It took me a minute to make sense of that. His wife would kill him if he got killed? I shook my head and decided I didn't need to understand it. The third man was outside keeping watch by Caitlin's bedroom window. I looped around the house out of his sight so I could come up behind him and surprise him. I stuck the gun in his ear. "Which one are you and what did you do to her?" He didn't say anything, so I repeated the question and jabbed the gun to emphasize each word. "Tom," he grunted. "Held her down for the old bugger. Did her a couple of times but I don't like leftovers." "Are you going to tell me where she is?" "Little leftovers? Or the bitch she made a widow?" I spat the words out. "The bitch who's responsible for what happened to Caitlin." "Focus, Nathan." I ignored Naveed's voice in my ear. "You won't get Laura. She had her husband in a gimp mask for a week for asking her if the dishwasher had been loaded. Whipped him raw too. If she did that to her own husband, fucked if you have a hope in hell. Good luck." He lumbered to his feet, reaching for his weapon. "Stop," I ordered, still aiming my gun at him. He dropped his hands to his sides again. "You think I'm the last one who matters? She has the money to hire as many thugs as she likes. Tomorrow, she'll have replacements for the lot of us, all convicted rapists and child molesters, who'd pay for a bit of little leftovers. Don't know why, she's about as responsive as a corpse." I wanted to kill him, my heart almost bursting out of my chest, I was so angry. "Not another step." "Or you'll shoot me?" He smiled grimly. It's nicer than what Laura will do to me or to you when she finds you. She'll leave little leftovers for last. I gritted my teeth. Don't call her that. Her name's Caitlin. He turned his back on me and started walking away. Like I fucking care. She was just a little cunt to me, and she's less than shit to Laura. She won't last long enough for me to learn her name. The sound of the shot echoed between the brick walls of the front yard and the house like there was more than one. I fired before I realized I was going to. He fell face first onto the paving as the acrid smoke wafted away in the wind. I left him where he lay. Like I fucking cared. Fuck Nathan. You were supposed to keep him alive for questioning. Naveed complained. There's none left now. She should be safe for a few minutes by herself. Come to the van so we can talk face to face. I started into the dark. 72. I tapped lightly on the van's side door. Naveed opened it for me, a tight smile on his face and a phone jammed between his ear and his shoulder. That's the lot, mate. He nodded in greeting. All clear. You can stand down. He beeped the end of the call and stuck his phone back in his pocket. Any sign of her? I asked tersely, slamming the door hard behind me. The icy fury I'd started with now burned white hot, and I had no one left to kill. Nope. Did you get anything out of them? I shook my head. They said they hurt Caitlin and they'd prefer a clean death over the one she'd give them, so they wouldn't say a thing about her, except how shit scared they were. I thought back to things I hadn't noticed at the time. They were all limping though, walking stiffly the way you do with a knee injury. I felt some satisfaction that Laura had already fucked them up before they died. Only now did I wish that Caitlin or I'd had some hand in that, but it was too late. I looked up to find Naveed's eyes on me. He looked like it pained him to say, "You should have left at least one of them alive, mate. You're going to get in trouble for killing them all." I shrugged. One of them killed himself instead of coming with us. He was police or ex-police. The one who shot me and her. Fucking crazy. Naveed looked worried. Him or you. Now we have no choice but to get the woman alive. You've killed the rest. I nodded. Yeah, she's next. Time to get the cleanup crew in here, I think, then we'll plan out her capture. It won't be easy. Easy to resist strangling her with my bare hands. I flexed my itching fingers. Naveed laughed. We've been after that crazy bitch for months. If it was easy, we'd have her already. I nodded again. But first, Caitlin. I need to get her somewhere safe. He shot me a sideways glance. Didn't you already hide her somewhere safe? She gave me the shock of my life when she came sliding out of the ceiling, right in front of one of my cameras. Some very close-up curves. He smiled. I stared at him. I didn't hide her in the roof. Show me. He checked the surveillance footage and replayed it, from maybe 20 minutes ago, when I'd headed for the third bloke in the bushes. A clear hallway, then a pair of black-clad legs dangled in front of the camera. She descended slowly, as if she was carefully letting herself down from the access cover by her hands. Her hair swung a little too short to touch her shoulders. It looked like a black helmet matching her dark clothes. She hung suspended from her fingertips for a moment before she dropped to a crouch in the passage. My heart plummeted, watching her pull out her handgun and hold it out in readiness as she rose smoothly to her feet. She strode down the passage, scanning from side to side, rolling out like a tank on patrol. It looks like she's doing your job for you, Naveed said with a smile. That's not Caitlin, I managed to say. I stared at him in horror as my heart froze. We both dived for the door, fumbling with the lock, losing precious seconds to clumsiness. Released, I sprinted back to her house, Naveed right behind me. How far away are the rest of them? I panted. 10 minutes, puffed Naveed, struggling to keep up as he pressed buttons on his phone. I heard him recall the team that should have been here by now, but I made no move to slow my pace. I was out of breath by the time I reached the toilet, but I wasn't sure if the pain in my chest was from trying to breathe or trying not to shout at Naveed for putting Caitlin at risk and not fucking telling me. I had to get her out and somewhere safe before Laura found her. The toilet door was still shut as I'd left it. But when I tried, the damn thing didn't open. There wasn't a lock, she must have somehow wedged it shut on purpose. "Caitlin, Angel, it's me," I called through the door, but I got no reply. The door was still stuck. I shoved with my full weight and it opened a little. I pushed and widened the gap further, now big enough to get my head inside for a proper look. She was there, lying face down, the soles of her shoes jammed against the door. I'd never felt so relieved. Laura didn't get to her. I got here in time. Oh, thank God. "Hey, it's okay. It's me." I knelt and moved her legs so that I could open the door fully. Strange, she was limp. I shook her shoulders, her nightie sliding off her and revealing her bare skin, but she didn't react. I turned her onto her back. My God! The black tiles beneath her were slick with blood, and her face was a mess. Feeling sick, I felt for a pulse that wasn't there. And the smell. Had all this been for nothing? Stupid to have left her alone. I should have stayed with her, that was what she'd asked me to do. Now she couldn't even have the satisfaction of being right. She couldn't have anything. I may as well have killed her. This was my fault. I'd as good as killed her. She was dead. Shit. I'd killed Caitlin. 73. I stood up slowly. I had tears on my face and I didn't want to turn around till I'd wiped them away. Naveed would think I'd lost it. But I'd lost her. Fuck. I swiped at my face with the hand that wasn't covered in her blood. When I turned around, Naveed's hands jerked up in stunned surrender, like someone had jammed something explosive up his ass. I saw light glint on something behind him and realized it was a gun to his head that had him scared shitless. The fingers holding it were small and definitely female, the edge of a black sleeve barely showing at her wrist. "Laura. You fucking bitch. You killed her." Naveed had a wife and baby waiting for him at home and I had nothing. I didn't care what happened to me anymore. I was useless now Caitlin was dead. What else did I have to lose? Maybe the last shreds of sanity is all. I heard her hoarse whispered yes as Naveed nodded emphatically, a puppet without strings. I hoped her throat was sore because Caitlin had tried to choke the life out of her, fighting back to her last breath. Now it was my turn. I lost all reason then and there. I shoved Naveed out of the way and went for her. It didn't matter if I died, just as long as I took her with me. It was the least that Caitlin's killer deserved. All the shit she put that poor girl through. She tried to hide behind him as she crooked her finger round the trigger. Naveed and I both heard the click as her gun jammed. We exchanged a glance and moved together. He pinned her up against the wall, almost smothering her with his body, as I bashed her gun hand on the metal door frame, trying to get her to drop the weapon. The psychopathic bitch wouldn't let go. She even tried to point the Ruger at me. I'd have laughed if I could unclench my jaw. The bitch's gun was useless, and she didn't have a free hand to do anything about it. I managed to pry my fingers between hers and the butt of the pistol, so the gun clattered to the floor. The noise distracted Naveed, and that was all she needed to slip from his grasp, sliding down the wall to the floorboards. From her crouch, she dived between his legs for her useless weapon, but I kicked it away from her scrabbling hands as he flattened her to the floor. Shoving her down, he used his much longer reach to grasp both of her arms and twist them up behind her back. She muttered into the mat. I couldn't hear everything she said, but it sure didn't sound complimentary. "Fucking kill you" was the only phrase I could make out. I itched to kill her too for everything she'd done, but Naveed was already shaking his head at me. We had to bring this bitch in alive, even though she'd shot Caitlin. He pulled out some handcuffs, looking up at me. I swallowed and nodded. She started struggling to throw him off as soon as she felt the touch of metal, but he held her down as he fitted the handcuffs tightly around her wrists and snapped them closed. Instead of giving up, she struggled harder. Her bare feet drummed on the boards like she was going to kick through the jarrah. Fat chance, bitch. That stuff was harder than my heart. Now look, Naveed said reasonably. You're coming with us whether you like it or not. If you don't cooperate, I'll knock you out and carry you like a sack of potatoes. Are you going to cooperate? Fuck you, she panted, her voice muffled by how her face was mashed into the hall runner. Naveed pulled a syringe out of his pocket. I'm taking that as a no. He ripped the cap off with his teeth and looked at me as he pressed the point of the needle to her neck. I wanted to be the one to stab her, just for the sheer satisfaction, but I knew it was better if Naveed did it. Gritting my teeth, I nodded again. She jerked her head up at the touch of the needle. Nathan. Please? Her eyes met mine. I saw betrayal and terror. Oh fuck no. I froze in horror. It was only for a moment, but in those precious seconds Naveed pushed the plunger on the syringe with his thumb, and she collapsed. He rose to his feet, leaving her body where it lay. No. It couldn't be. I had to be hallucinating. Like the time I thought Caitlin was Alana in the ambulance. No. Don't think about that. Lock it down. Think about now and what you need to do. I dropped to my knees beside the unconscious girl, my hands shaking. I reached out to touch the handcuffs at her wrists and saw the scars beneath the metal. No. Gently, I turned her over. Her face was streaked with blood and grime, but it was unmistakably her. I hadn't killed her. She was alive. I lifted her torso so her head rested on my chest. Get the cuffs off her. My voice came out quieter than I'd intended. Naveed looked confused. But she just tried to kill both of us. I'm not taking her in the car without restraints. What if she wakes up? You're not taking her anywhere. Take the handcuffs off her. I need to get her cleaned up before she wakes up. Unwillingly, he did as I asked. Gently, I brought her arms around so her hands rested in her lap, trying to rub away the red marks on her wrists. Her expression tightened in discomfort as she pulled her hands away from me, so I stopped. With a sigh, I shifted, lifting her limp form in my arms as I stood up. Get some towels. A lot of towels. And some clean pajamas for her. Bring them to the bathroom. I strode toward the shower, her body carefully cradled in my arms. I was filled with a desperate desire never to let her go again. I'm sorry, I whispered to her, too late as I touched my lips to her blood-matted hair. Naveed hadn't moved, he was staring at the wall. Naveed. He didn't turn around. Naveed. He finally turned around, then stared at me or Caitlin. But she killed the girl we were trying to protect. What do you think you're going to do with her? I looked from the bloodied bitch's body on the toilet floor to the unconscious angel in my arms and shook my head. No. Caitlin killed the bitch we wanted to bring in alive in what looks like a fair fight. I tasted salt. Too late I realized that it was Laura's blood I'd licked off my lips. I shifted closer to spit the offending saliva on her faceless corpse. Naveed's mouth hung open. But you said, the girl in the surveillance footage wasn't Caitlin. Caitlin couldn't hang from her fingertips, nor use her hands to slowly climb from a ceiling. She didn't move like a tank either. She wasn't. That was Laura. Somehow Caitlin managed to take her out and take her clothes too. She left her own clothes with the body. His disbelief wasn't easily dispelled. How can this be the sweet little girl you've been guarding? How'd she beat the killer bitch we couldn't catch? Someone's going to have to debrief her to find out. Caitlin was stronger than he knew. She'd survived this long against all odds, why be surprised at one more night? It's over, mate. The three that were left, Nick, Pete, Tom, they're all dead. We don't need to debrief her. We know what she did and we don't need to know how. We're going to make all this go away before she wakes up and remembers what she did. Naveed looked in horror at Caitlin. There's no way she'll forget this. She killed someone and then we? He swallowed painfully. He still held the syringe but he'd put the cap back on. Good thing too. It was shaking in his hand. She's blocked out the memories of a lot worse, I replied. I'll tell her it was a dream. Naveed was shaking his head in disbelief. That's a hell of a messed up dream for a girl to have. Compared to some of her nightmares, this is nothing. Mate, he started to say, but I cut him off. Can you get someone to take care of the mess? I nodded in its direction. I want the whole team guarding every entrance to the house, especially her room. I want you outside her door all night. If anyone leaves his post, I want him replaced, even if for only a minute. And get her some ice for her hand. He stared at me. It's over. You said it yourself. I slowly shook my head. We got all the ones who hurt her. One of them said she paid them for what they did. She could have hired more. I swallowed. Please. I can't stand to lose her again. One more night just in case. They're all on duty tonight anyway, mate, please. I'm begging you. Naveed nodded. Hell of a night. He chewed on his lip, as if he was trying to bite back what he really wanted to say. I'll go direct our team, they're arriving as we speak. You take care of her, okay? Curtly, I nodded too, carrying my precious burden back to where I could get her cleaned up. I wished I could wipe her memories away as easily as blood. 74. Staring and standing beside her car, they matched. Bright red car, bright red lips. Shiny black and silver wheels, shiny black bobbed hair. Her heavy breathing friend. A blow couldn't breathe. Pushed in with the pervert. Her friend. She drove away. Kept driving. Bastard in the passenger seat. Her friend. Forced down against taut thighs. Face up. Face faded as dark descended. Red tinted darkness. 75. When I reached the bathroom, Michael, his earpiece barely visible, had a stack of towels in his arms and a fairly confused look on his face. We exchanged nods. Naveed said you needed these, he said. Spread a couple of them flat on the floor, one on top of the other, so I can put her down on them, I instructed. I watched Michael smooth the towels across the tiles before I was satisfied. Now go get her some pajamas or a nightie to wear. I don't care if you have to go out and buy it. Just leave them outside the door. He nodded and left. He didn't have anything else to say to me tonight. I didn't have anything to say to me either. All my attention was on Caitlin. I'd come so close to losing her, I was scared almost into speechlessness. But I couldn't touch Caitlin without talking to her. She flinched away from contact unless I spoke. No bloody wonder after tonight. Okay, I'll be really careful just in case you've been hurt. I'm going to try to get you cleaned up a bit. It's okay, it's just you and me. No one else. I carried Caitlin to the shower. The plastic chair was still in the cubicle, so that's where I carefully placed her, the arms curving around her and keeping her upright. My arms felt empty as I let her go. I shook myself out of my silly sentimentality and dropped to my knees on the tiles. I started checking her over. She'd been splattered with Laura's blood, dusted in something grey and then rolled on the carpet, so it was hard to tell if she was wounded. I decided to check her bones for breaks first, then look for anything else after I'd cleaned her up. Aside from the red marks from the handcuffs, her left hand looked fine. Her right hand wasn't so good though, already swelling and tender from the pounding it had taken against the wall. A trickle of blood started at one knuckle, running down to her wrist. I took her hurt hand in mine and brought it up to my lips. I'm sorry, I whispered again. I felt stupid talking to her while she was unconscious, but it wasn't the first time, though it might be the last. I wondered what she was dreaming about, or if she heard me. I closed my eyes, wishing there was someone else I could ask to do this. But there wasn't anyone else I trusted. I took a deep breath. I'm going to take these clothes off you, Angel. I need to check your injuries and make sure you're okay. Then I'm going to get you cleaned up. You won't need those anymore. I'll get you into your own clothes as soon as I can." Gently I peeled the bloodstained pants from her legs, then pulled them off her feet, one at a time. I balled them up and threw them into the corner by the bin. I took a deep breath and looked at Caitlin. There was dried blood on her knees and all along her shins. I closed my eyes, the images coming unbidden. She'd knelt in her nightie on the floor, slick with Laura's blood, as she pulled the pants off her and put them on. Fuck, what had she been thinking? Taking the clothes from a corpse? Another deep breath that I held. Time for the vest. I swallowed, wishing I didn't have to do this. I had to check if Naveed had broken any of her ribs. I told myself that if I thought of this as just another med practical, and ignored her boobs like any professional doctor would, I'd be okay. Fuck. No, I wouldn't. Like a coward, I closed my eyes as soon as I touched the zip. Caitlin cringed, throwing her arms up to protect her chest, pushing my hands away. I lifted my hands in surrender. It's me and it's okay. I need to check if you're injured and get you out of these clothes. You're covered in blood, Angel. I need to know that you're okay. Cautiously, I touched her zip again. Just me, Angel. I'm not going to hurt you. And I'm going to do my best not to perv on you, I swear. I clamped my mouth shut so I didn't say it. Right now, I'd apologize for it being dark at night if it would make her feel better. Slowly, I pulled the zip down, then flipped it open to expose her blood-soaked shirt. Pretend you're back in the hospital, doing a chest examination on someone who's been in a fight. It's okay, I murmured as I checked her ribs. I breathed a sigh of relief as I realized that none of them was broken, though she had a fair bit of bruising already. Okay, I'm going to take the shirt and vest off you completely so I can wash off some of the blood. Carefully, I slid the vest down her arms, mindful of catching her hands on the armholes, before I pulled the shirt over her head. Desperately, I tried to think of anything but what was in front of me. I turned away to bunch the whole mess up and pitch it after the pants, but it was soaked in blood, leaving still more on Caitlin's skin and mine. I'd never been so happy to see she wasn't wearing a bra, for it was one less thing to take off. I pulled the shower head from its cradle, pointing the nozzle at the floor as I turned the tap on. I waited for the water to warm up, wanting it the perfect temperature to wash Caitlin without waking or burning her. I kept one finger in the spray the whole time and turned the fine mist on Caitlin's body. I fixed my eyes on the floor, trying not to look at her as the pink water cascaded onto the tiles. When the water ran clear, I dared to lift my eyes. Her shins were clean and a few seconds more took the last of the dried blood from her knees. I leaned over her, letting the spray stream down her back as I watched the water on the tiles go from red to pink to clear once more. Lastly, I focused on Caitlin's face. Blood streaked her cheeks and there were chunks of Laura in her hair. I couldn't leave Laura's blood on Caitlin's hands or any other part of her. There was no way I could convince her it was all a dream if traces still remained. Gently, I cupped the back of her neck in my hand so I could tip her head back and rinse the gore from her hair. That done, I carefully directed the spray so it ran lightly down her face. She screwed her face up, but she didn't open her eyes. "It's okay, Angel," I said softly. "Almost done." I turned the water off and reached for a towel to cover her with. I spread another across my arms and lifted her from the chair to the towels on the floor, laying her flat. I slid a folded towel under her head as a makeshift cushion, spread another towel over the top of her, and returned to the shower. For a moment I looked at her, lying unconscious and cocooned in the white towels as she had been in the sheets on a hospital bed. It was less than 6 weeks ago, but it felt like a lifetime. A lifetime that had nearly ended for her. I stuck the shower head back in its cradle and turned the water on, hotter and stronger than I had for Caitlin. I dumped my vest on the floor and stood beneath the needle spray in my dripping clothes as tears rolled down my cheeks. I don't know how long I stood there, nor whether I was mourning or relieved. Or both. Eventually, I came to my senses enough to realize that I had to get Caitlin up off the floor and into her own bed. I shut off the shower and dripped across the floor to the door. Just outside was a plastic shopping bag, so I yanked it inside and closed the door. I dried my hands before taking a look in the bag. It looked like someone had gone up to Kmart and brought back some new pink pajamas for Caitlin. I ripped the tags off and looked at her towel-shrouded body on the floor. Now I just needed to get her into them. I swallowed and leaned over her, not sure where to start. The pocket of my shirt sent a stream of water pattering onto the tiles. I jerked back, not wanting to wet her again. Fuck. I needed to take my wet clothes off, and any clean ones I had were still in her room. Fucked if I was leaving her alone to go get dressed. But I couldn't go naked around her either, in case she woke up. Fuck. I stripped my wet clothes off quickly and wrapped a towel around my waist, praying it wouldn't come off. I wasn't sure what she'd do if she woke up to find me naked next to her. I knelt on the floor beside Caitlin and slid a hand down her back, lifting her torso a little off the floor. "Okay, I've found you some pajamas. Let's get you dressed again," I murmured as I slid the top over her head. She started to pull away, but I kept talking. "It's okay, it's me, just getting you dressed for bed." I pulled the top down over her chest and stomach, taking the towel away as I did so. The top was huge on her. I told myself it was better than nothing. I couldn't have done any better. Only in books and movies could a bloke buy clothes for a girl and get the size perfect, first try. Right, time for the pants. I pulled the towel down further. Oh shit. She still wore her wet underwear. I wasn't game to find her fresh underwear. I didn't want to take these off, but I'd have to. Fuck. Caitlin's a beautiful girl. I'm not gay. It was fucking hard, and I was wearing nothing but a fairly flimsy towel. I tried really hard to think of something, anything, but the beautiful girl I was about to undress. I kept the towel over her. I hooked my fingers into the waistband of her knickers and pulled them down, keeping my eyes closed till I got them to her feet. Equally quickly, I slid the pajama pants up to her waist, trying to touch her as little as possible. I pulled the towel away when I knew she was dressed. I took the last towel and spread it across my chest before I lifted Caitlin up and carried her back to her bedroom. I laid her on the sheets, my hand lingering on her hair as I let her head down onto the pillow. I wanted fuck. I pulled the quilt up to her collarbone, hiding temptation from sight. Naveed knocked on the door. "Everyone's in place. Even if there's nothing to watch for, they're all dead," he said. He looked hesitant. "Can I see her?" I jerked my head toward the bed, lifting a finger to my lips to indicate quiet. She'd have a heart attack if she woke up to find him that close to her again, after what we just did. He stood over Caitlin and looked at her for a moment before he whispered, "She's just a kid. How did she survive?" I shrugged. "She's stronger than she looks." He got down on his knees beside the bed, next to her. "But isn't she beautiful? No wonder girls like this cover their faces. With one look, she could steal your soul. I swear Persian girls are the most beautiful in the world." Before I could stop him, he ran his fingertips down her cheek. She shrank away from his fingers, screwing her face up. "No. Nathan. Nathan?" I jerked my head toward the door. "Get out," I hissed. I dropped to my knees beside her bed and held her tightly. "I'm here," I breathed into her ear. "I'm here." I felt her body relax in my arms and my heart with it. "Why don't you just seduce her and be done with it?" Naveed's voice startled me. Where he stood, his face was in shadow, his expression unreadable. "We've all seen how you look at her, how you act with her. You even sleep with her every night. Some of the other guys find it hard to believe you haven't yet, but they don't know you. You wouldn't look at her the way you do if you'd already fucked her." "It's not like that," I told him. "She'd run screaming if I so much as kissed her. Or fight as dirty as she had to if she was cornered and she couldn't run." I ached in more than one place at the memory of my lips on hers earlier that evening. I like a girl with spirit. A terrible line for a movie villain, yet no less true in my case. I hid a smile. But Caitlin wasn't just a girl with spirit. Strike a match and I could set that spirit alight. Oh God, what I'd give to see her burn with a passion that wasn't fury. Naveed interrupted my thoughts as if he'd heard them. Give it a shot. What do you have to lose? You said it yourself. This operation is effectively over after tonight. It's not like you'll be seeing her for much longer. I could see his shoulders shrug. What did I have to lose? I could lose her. For the second time that night I felt hollow, as if all my organs had suddenly been sucked into a vacuum in my chest, my ribs caving in under the pressure. I snapped, we almost lost her tonight because you couldn't count. Only 3 men and no sign of her, you said. The only reason we didn't fail is that Caitlin shot her. Now go stand guard to make sure there aren't any more mistakes. Just like you taking so long to help her. When she had to shoot the bastard on the beach herself, he shot back. When I'd thought she was dead. Like tonight. Get out, I managed to say. He shrugged. You might want to put some clothes on if you're not going to fuck her. You look pretty stupid in a towel. I heard his laughter as he left. He shut the door again and we were alone. The loudest sound in the room was her even breathing, lifting my heart like a feather buoyed by each breath. She was alive. Oh, thank God she was alive. They were all taken care of. All of them. Her house was safe, she was safe, even I was safe. For the first time in how long? Too long. I pulled on my own pajamas automatically, my eyes not leaving her sleeping face. I almost lost her, then I almost killed her. By what miracle was she alive? I didn't care. I lay down beside her, wrapped my arms around her like I had in the hospital, it seemed like a different century, and tried to believe that this was really happening. Despite my stupidity, she was alive in my arms. 76. Hand sliding between shirt and skin. Fighting. No. Please help me. These hands won't hurt, sometimes help. Just let me. Scared. Tears. I don't want to. Clinical hands. No passion. So cold. Couldn't get it up. Clothes taken away. So cold. Shivering until handed a pulled-off sweater. Still warm from someone else's skin. Wouldn't look. Couldn't look. Need Superman. Need help. Sorry. 77. In my nightmare, the dead girl in the toilet had a face and it was hers. My heart broke anew as I felt hers no longer beat, before I realized her eyes were open. You bastard. Fuck, I hate zombies. I woke up in shock to find that Caitlin had woken in the dark too. Her breathing beside me was fast, panicked, as if she was choking back tears. I didn't dare touch her. Zombies, corpses, blood, what if she still wanted to kill me? She'd said as much before Naveed knocked her out. Hey, are you alright? I asked her. Her words tumbled over each other, trying to tell me her nightmare as I tried to focus on what she was saying, pushing the image of her dead face out of my mind. Just a bad dream, I told myself as much as her. It's all over now. And she was alive here, so close. I turned on my side to look at her in the faint illumination filtering through the curtains from the street lights outside, to see and believe what I was telling myself. At the same time, she shifted closer to me. My lips met hers, her body against mine. I both heard and felt her sharp intake of breath. I froze for a moment, but she didn't move away or try to kill me. I should have backed away. Fuck, I should have. But I didn't. This could be my last chance. Fuck it. For the second time that night I kissed her, apprehensive at first, then with more feeling as I realized she was kissing me back. If the last thing I did before she ripped my face off was kiss her, then I got a pretty good deal. But if she wasn't going to kill me, I was taking advantage of her. She'd remember and she wouldn't forgive me for it, I struggled to tell myself, but even I couldn't hold that thought tonight. Her hands were under my shirt, on the bare skin of my back. I kissed her lips, her neck, following her singlet strap as it slid off her shoulder and partway down her arm. I brushed my lips along the satin edge from her shoulder to the swell of her breast. I took a deep breath and let it out, fluttering the thin layer of fabric. I gently cupped her breast in my hand through her top, hesitated, then planted a kiss where satin met skin before letting go of her. I felt her gasp, her rapid heartbeat and her ragged breathing as I waited to see what she'd do next. She pulled back. Her hands held my face like a huge, hairy hamburger she was hesitant to touch. Her lips sought mine in a less ardent kiss than my last. Her hands weren't touching me anymore. Her lips were the only contact between us now. Before that was broken too. Resigned, I consoled myself with the thought that every kiss we shared now was one more than I had any reason to expect. Even the thought of more than that was a faint hope. Faint but alluring. Oh God, what I'd give for more than just a hope. I dreamed I killed someone, Nathan, because I'd prefer to die than let them hurt me again. Her voice was small and sad. I dreamed you were dead and I won't let anyone hurt you again, I thought. I kissed her mouth, her lips salty with fresh tears. Don't cry, Angel. What can I do to make you happy to be alive again? Just a dream. Let me help take your mind off it. I was slow to slide my arms around her, hoping to hold her close if nothing else. Of course I hoped for more too. Hoped she'd forget everything else and believe it was nothing but a bad dream. Dreamed she'd let me do some of the things I fantasized about the first time I saw her. Not a hope. Caitlin gave a shudder and I stopped. No. I can't do this. No, Nathan. Maybe one day, when it's all over and there's no one left for me to be afraid of, but not tonight. I felt the broad smile spread across my face, though she couldn't see it. It is over, Angel. They caught all 3 men tonight trying to sneak into your house. I heard the names Pete, Nick, Tom. The woman too. It's all over and you're safe. She shook her head and pulled away. All of them? What about Mike? And Simon? If they're still out there, it's not over yet. I felt sick. I thought you said there were 4. I looked over at the laptop closed on the desk. I wanted to switch it on and look through her nightmares to work out what I'd missed. But I couldn't go snooping through her files while she was watching me. I scrambled to my feet. I'm going to go to the toilet. I dragged myself away from her, stumbling toward the bathroom without looking at Naveed. I couldn't face him or the toilet, reminders of the corpse that had almost been hers. Could still be if there were more of them out there. I gripped the edge of the basin, my head swirling, trying to focus on whether I was going to throw up or not. When I managed to get a hold of myself enough to realize that I was not, I turned the tap on. I took my time washing my hands, trying to come to terms with the last few hours, still not entirely sure they'd really happened. I splashed water on my face, a cold shock that still couldn't clear my head. I did it again, slopping water down my pajama top. Oh fuck. I pulled it over my head and draped it over the side of the bath. I dried myself before I went back to Caitlin's room. This time I stopped just outside the door, trying to work out how to tell Naveed that I'd fucked up. More nightmares? Naveed asked, not looking at me. Yes, I said shortly, low enough so that Caitlin wouldn't hear me. Hopefully there won't be any more tonight. I stared at him, not sure how to start. She says we didn't get them all. He raised his eyebrows. Are you shitting me or serious? Serious, mate. I wouldn't joke about Caitlin's safety. He pulled out his phone and started dialing. It's Naveed, sir. Sorry, sir. No, apparently Nathan says we didn't get all of them. No, sir, sure. He held the phone out for me. He wants to hear it from the fuckwit's mouth. The fuckwit tonight was definitely me. Hello? Naveed tells me you were quite the hero taking out 4 of them in a gunfight, my boss said with a laugh. The girl was good bait? A pity we didn't get any of them alive, but he tells me you have new information for me. The following silence was ominous. The girl says we didn't get them all. He laughed. Has she changed her story? Before you told us there were 3 men left and the woman, Naveed's confirmed, 3 men dead and 1 woman, with no casualties on our side. I wet my lips. One of tonight's kills was a police officer. His name doesn't match what I remember her saying. I took a deep breath. She said there could still be 2 of them we didn't get. One of the kills confirmed it. The woman had the means to hire whoever she felt was necessary. So you're saying we still have live ones we can interrogate? He sounded surprised. Live ones who aren't here and could still target Caitlin, I replied cautiously. A sigh. Fuck, we can't waste any more resources on just a hope. Naveed's team will pull out in the morning. Make sure you get her out of the house, so we can remove any surveillance equipment. But it's only been a week, sir. You gave me 2. The "sir" grated on my tongue, but I gritted through it anyway. It couldn't hurt to be polite. Silence. You told me I was assigned to her for 2 weeks. So Naveed's team will be leaving, but I'll remain. Presumably, you'll permit me to call on his team in case their assistance is required. Correct? He laughed again. Sure, Nathan. You can see your project through to completion. 1 more week and your contract is finished. Finished? All this would be over in a week and I could go back to uni next year. And I'd get to see Caitlin again. Maybe. Thank you, sir, I said as the phone beeped to indicate he'd already hung up. I looked at Naveed. So you're all gone in the morning and I have to take her out of the house tomorrow? He nodded. As early as possible. The boys'll be glad to wrap this one up. Babysitting your girlfriend was getting to be a joke. She's not, I began. He nodded and waved me into silence. I ventured back into Caitlin's room and shut the door behind me. I sat on the edge of her bed, listening to her even breathing, not saying anything. Caitlin, I began softly, but she didn't answer. I wanted to touch her, but I clenched my hands to stop myself. Angel. I swear we'll get them too. I won't stop searching until I know you're safe. She still didn't reply. There was the other thing, even if she was asleep, I had to say it aloud. It wouldn't be the first time I'd confessed to her as she slept. You're a very beautiful woman. Every man who sees you is attracted to you. I'd have to be blind not to notice. Or concentrating really hard on something else. I'm sorry if I got carried away and pushed you too far. She didn't say a word. Asleep already, I thought. Lucky. I thought of going to sleep on the couch in the lounge room, or getting some spare blankets and making up a bed on the floor of her bedroom for me. I couldn't bring myself to leave her tonight. Until I left her house for good. Wondering where she kept her spare blankets, I wavered between waking her to ask and leaving to search the house for them. Wasn't there a blanket at the top of her cupboard? I stood up, trying to remember. Her fingers on my back, a light touch. Nathan? MMMPH? I turned so I was facing her, even though I couldn't see her. I could hear the bed springs shift as she moved. When she spoke, her voice sounded closer. You think I'm beautiful? Even, she swallowed, even with the scars? The scars will fade and you'll always be beautiful, I thought but didn't say. Yes, Caitlin, you're very beautiful. The scars don't change that. I felt the breeze of her breath on my skin an instant before her arms were around my neck, her cheek against my chest. Thank you, Nathan, she murmured. I draped an arm cautiously around her. Anytime, Angel. Anytime you want, all you have to do is ask. I tried to bring my thoughts back to reality here and now, but that was her body beside mine, so close I could feel her breasts move with every breath, me wearing nothing but my shorts. How about we try for some more sleep? I asked her, guiding her back to bed. She didn't let go of me, so I lay down beside her. She pillowed her head on my chest. Sleep well, she said softly. I listened to her breathing slow, becoming even again. Even as I closed my eyes, I doubted I'd sleep with the tumult in my head. At least if I had any more dreams tonight, they weren't going to be nightmares. 78. When I woke up, Caitlin was still asleep, her head resting on the pillow beside me, a slight smile visible on her face. No more nightmares then, I decided. I reached out to stroke her hair, then hesitated. How much of last night would she remember? What else had she remembered? Last night she'd need me, called me names, I'd almost gotten her killed and she'd tried to kill me. And afterwards, I'd kissed her, she'd responded, and the feel of her skin, the taste of her hands on me, how much I'd wanted her, how much I still want her now. Oh shit. I sat up and started looking for my clothes, hoping I could make it into a cold shower before she woke up. Part of me hoped she'd forget all of it, thinking the whole night was a dream. It wouldn't be the first time. Then she could go on, tolerating my presence because I was a friend who wanted to help her, and I didn't want anything else. Could I go back to ignoring how much I want her? Especially now I had the faintest hope that she wanted me. Or one day she would. Last night, she'd shown me a small part of the fire she'd had before all of this. The inner fire that had gotten her through it. To imagine what she'd be like, not scared and not hurt anymore. Just Caitlin. I found myself staring at her. I want you was probably written across my face, and my shorts as well. Her big dark eyes opened. Oh fuck. I had to cover up before she noticed and ran away screaming. Or worse. I smiled and sat on the edge of the bed, dumping my clothes in my lap. Good morning. She was silent for a moment as she sat up, pulling the quilt with her. Caitlin winced, her fingers looking thicker than usual. I'd forgotten the ice pack, so they'd swollen up from the beating her hand took last night. A beating I gave her, oh God. I swallowed. Good morning, she replied vaguely. What happened to my hand? I thought quickly. You must have been lying on it. You passed out in the toilet last night, Angel, remember? Of course she wouldn't. Maybe you hit it as you fell. You were lying pretty awkwardly on the floor. Awkward was an understatement. Pinned under Naveed before he knocked her out as I looked on and did nothing. Caitlin looked puzzled, then nodded slowly. I changed the subject. Did you have any more nightmares? No more nightmares. Caitlin's face lifted with a watery smile. Good. I hesitated before I gave in and leaned forward to kiss her. Her hands crept around my neck as she kissed me back. I didn't want to stop. Her quilt slipped down and I was conscious of her breasts pressed against my chest. She pushed me away, clutching at the quilt again. Nathan, please stop. She sounded breathless. I leaned back again as she caught her breath. I wish I was brave enough to do this. I'm still scared, Nathan. I'm scared of, even with you. She looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. I wrapped my arms around her, quilt and all, and told her it was all right, that she knew I'd never hurt her. As she cried, my heart sank. She wanted me. One day, next week or next month or next year, she'd be ready. All I had to do was hold on to her and wait. Hoping she didn't remember. 79. You should wear this. I dropped the red dress in her lap. I sat behind her to help fasten her bra, trying not to think about how well the color matched the dress. I had a serious craving for strawberries. Her hair was still wet from the shower. Caitlin sprayed something on her damp tresses as she brushed them. More strawberries, I realized as the scent of her conditioner spray hit my nose. What for? She asked. I'm going to take you out for lunch, then maybe we can see a movie, or you can buy some more clothes to replace what was damaged. Afterwards we can have dinner somewhere. After that, I'll take you home if you like. Or, if you prefer, I can take you back to my house for a bit. I raised my eyebrows. I would like to see your house, she said thankfully. Okay, so get dressed so we can go have lunch. I left the room but stayed by the door. She still had trouble with zips and buttons, and if I wasn't there to offer a hand, I'd come back to find her half-dressed and in tears, her hands in the freezer looking for ice to dull the pain. She never asked for help. I'd have to offer or see her hurting. "Nathan, could I ask you a favor?" Her words were quiet and precise. "Sure," I answered. She didn't ask for many favors. "Tonight, I'd like you to get me drunk in a pub or a nightclub, please." I was glad she couldn't see my face. I didn't know whether to be horrified or happy. My heart flew. She'd do this so she could find the courage she thought she didn't have. She wanted me to get her drunk so she'd sleep with me. Before it fell. That'd be taking advantage of her. No, it wouldn't. She was a responsible adult making a choice. And was twisted like a crushed aluminium can. She wasn't a responsible adult. The pain and the pain drugs messed with her head. If I took advantage of her when she was drunk, I'd never forgive myself, and she might not either. She might not even do it. She might just want to get drunk, pass out, and nothing would happen. "Why do you want to get drunk?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder at her, but she didn't need my help yet. This time she hesitated and sounded uncertain. "Because I turned 18 while I was still in hospital. I've never been drunk in a pub, and I want to. I know that you'll make sure I get to bed afterwards." Big, trusting eyes looked up at me. If only she trusted me enough to let me do what I'd like to with her. Nothing scary, nothing strange, nothing I'd have hesitated to ask any other girl I wanted. Until Caitlin. If only she'd let me. "Okay. I'll take you to a pub tonight and buy you some belated birthday drinks," I told her. "And anything else you want, Angel, all you have to do is ask. And if you don't, I'll be the perfect fucking gentleman as always," I resolved grimly. 80. The bouncer took one look at her ID, recognized who Caitlin was, and let us straight in. It was Friday night and the place was packed, but we'd managed to get a tiny little table with a good view over the dance floor that wasn't too far from the bar. I bought us drinks and we toasted her belated happy birthday. She was happy enough, well into her first drink, when the DJ turned the music down to make his announcement. "We have a local celebrity here tonight, a girl who we all thought was dead, but here she is, celebrating her 18th birthday here with us. Let's all say a big happy birthday to Caitlin Lockyer." Cheers erupted as he pointed straight at us. "There she is. And we're all going to make sure she has a great time tonight." More cheers, louder this time. The music started up again, and Caitlin suddenly became very interested in finishing her drink. People around us were staring, and I could hear someone at the next table saying, "Found by some bloke on a beach where she'd been left to die." I offered to get her another drink, but it was a long wait at the bar. I found myself listening to the conversation going on behind me. "Matt, don't. Her boyfriend's just at the bar, you're not going to get anywhere with her." I say, "He's her bodyguard, not boyfriend. Come on mate, it's worth a try. The worst she can do is say no." I turned slightly to look at the blokes having the conversation, just in time to see Matt disappear into the crowd. His mate shook his head and drank his beer. "Nathan?" The voice that knew my name was familiar. Memories stirred of tequila shots, chartreuse, and taking home 2 hot Canadian students. Marcus, who'd never let me live down leaving him alone while I escorted both girls to my house. I turned my back on the head-shaking stranger and came face to face with Marcus. "Hi mate." He grinned. "I knew it was you. Haven't seen you in ages. I've had the pick of the best while you've been away. Who's your target tonight?" Feeling proud, I nodded toward Caitlin. Red dress. And far more beautiful than any other girl I'd seen in this club. "Not tonight. Not ever." I saw Matt sidle out of the crowd and sit down opposite Caitlin. "Looks like you have competition, mate," Marcus teased. Matt said something and she gave a short reply with a nervous smile. I shook my head. My smile was as confident as ever. I was the only one who'd be taking Caitlin home. "No mate. Caitlin's mine." "Caitlin?" Marcus peered at her, looking worried. "No, don't mate." I laughed. "Give up on my angel?" Not a hope. Why the hell not? She's been in the news, mate. Kidnapped, raped and found by some bloke on a beach where they left her to die. She's not worth it. Marcus sounded really serious. He didn't know her, nor what she was worth. Because some other blokes had her first? You know I'm not into virgins, mate. Matt said something else to Caitlin, but she didn't reply. Marcus persisted. Are you stupid? Not only is she mission impossible, but if you manage to get her drunk enough to get into her pants, there's no saying she won't call it rape in the morning. You're fucked either way. Don't, mate. I heard the words, but I didn't pay them any heed. Matt must have introduced himself to Caitlin because he stuck out a hand to shake hers. She hesitated before she offered him her badly bruised right hand. I watched him give a firm handshake, squeezing her fingers too hard. I saw her lips frame the words "let go of me" as she winced in pain. Oh shit. I left Marcus standing at the bar and started to shove my way through the crowd back to Caitlin. Before I could get there, the guy from the next table leaned back and punched Matt in the face. Matt keeled over backwards, flat out on the floor. The half-dozen feet he'd almost landed on laid into the guy too, so I couldn't even see where he was in the free-for-all. Caitlin stood up unsteadily but didn't know where to go to get away from the brawl that was rapidly escalating in front of her. She looked around frantically, too scared to release the scream I could see building as she jerked in each panicked breath. I curled an arm around her, trying to support her. I could feel her body shaking as she watched the bouncer drag a bruised and bleeding Matt out of the nightclub. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I asked urgently. He barely touched me, she whimpered, almost ready to cry. Look mate, it's the girl's birthday and if you don't want what he got, I think you should leave her alone. The guy from the next table who'd thrown the first punch had sat down again and his warning was directed at me. I needed to leave. She was safe here but I wasn't. I could feel her sagging against me, she couldn't stand up much longer. If she didn't sit back down, she'd need my help even more than she did now. Caitlin murmured something I couldn't hear. I leaned closer to her and asked her to repeat it. She tilted her head up, so her lips were close to my ear. Don't leave me. You promised. My heart froze in my chest. All my previously solid thoughts of leaving her alone again, even for a moment, sublimated to join the dry ice haze wafting around the dance floor of the club. I closed my eyes for the briefest moment, struggling to breathe. You promised. You owe her, you bastard. Last warning, mate, our friendly neighbor told me ominously. From the looks on the surrounding faces, they all agreed with him, and they'd probably back him up too. I couldn't take them all on. And I couldn't leave her alone. Do you want to stay here or go home? I asked her urgently. I want to get out of here. I could feel her panic. Let go of the girl. Friendly neighbor stood, both hands clenched on the backrest of his bar stool. Wrap your arms around my neck, give me a big sloppy kiss, smile and act drunk. I won't let you fall and I'll get you out of here, I told Caitlin, letting go of her and throwing my hands up in surrender. She stumbled, as I knew she would, but she came up smiling. I love you, Nathan, Caitlin slurred, throwing her arms around my neck. I stared at her in shock for saying words I never thought I'd hear, even though I knew she didn't mean them. It took me a minute to realize how much weight she had hanging on my neck. I was so euphoric. I reached out as if all I wanted to do was steady her, but really trying to stop her from breaking my neck. She kissed me clumsily, as if she didn't know how, and looked up at me with a blissful smile on her face before her knees buckled. I had most of her weight anyway. It wasn't an issue to lift her off her feet and into my arms, commenting about how she'd had enough to drink for one night. Her smile remained pasted on her face as she looked up at me. Smiles, claps and a few bawdy cheers followed us as I carried Caitlin out of the club. I could see Marcus shaking his head in disbelief as we passed. I shrugged, smiled and shouldered my way through to the cool darkness outside. I tried to set her on her feet again when we reached the street, but her arms were still around my neck, so she swung around to face me. She was still smiling, looking up at me, but it was too dark for me to tell how this was different. She stretched up to kiss me again, hesitant at first and then, more like, last night. And I knew she wasn't drunk. Thank you, Caitlin said slowly as she pulled away from me. Like some lovesick teenager who'd just slurped his first kiss, I wanted to savor the citrus taste of her tongue in my mouth. My adrenaline levels were higher now than they'd been at the thought of a fight in the club. I tried to calm down enough to sound sane. Come on, I'll take you home now if you like. Your place? You promised your place, she insisted. And I'd like to stop at a bottle shop on the way. You said you'd get me another drink. 81. You could have cleaned up after your little drinking party last night, Chris said as she walked into the kitchen, an empty bottle in each hand. She clinked them into the recycling bin. Well, you're certainly back. Back in action too, if last night was anything to go by. She smothered a smirk with her hand. I heard you two come in, but I didn't hear her go. So what time did she leave last night? I looked at her, bleary-eyed and yawning, as the watery sunlight trickling through the kitchen window turned her fair hair into a halo Chris didn't deserve. She didn't. You let her sleep in your bed? What happened while you were away to make you so considerate? Irritated, I responded, she's tired and she had a bit to drink last night. She needs some sleep before I take her home. Caitlin had smiled in her sleep as I tucked the quilt around her. My mouth had gone dry and I couldn't bring myself to wake her yet. So beautiful. Chris whistled. She gets to sleep in your bed and she gets driven home. When did you become such a perfect gentleman? I tried to concentrate on making myself a coffee, in between thoughts of Caitlin. I didn't want or need to listen to Chris. You're not having breakfast? Or have you already eaten? Can't you leave it for even a second? I didn't want to get into an argument, I wanted to have Caitlin's breakfast ready before she was awake. What can I make her for breakfast? Do we have anything besides, I glared at the box, cornflakes? Breakfast too? Was she that good? Chris pressed. Now I was pissed off. Leave her alone. Just lay off her, okay? She let up. All right. She paused long enough for me to take a sip of my coffee. At least it's good to know you're not a pedophile. What? I nearly choked. Well, you finally left that poor kid alone. The one in hospital. How old was she, 12, 13? It's about time you got over your crush on her. I didn't have a crush on her. She wanted me to be there. Come on, the last thing she needed was to have you at her bedside, mooning over her. There are plenty of girls who'd love to have me sit by their bedside when they're in hospital. Chris took a deep breath. Like the one in your bed right now? Maybe, but not a girl who's been abducted. After she's been raped and God knows what else, the last thing she wants is a man anywhere near her. Least of all you. She grabbed the cornflake box and turned around to put it away. She reached for the sponge and started wiping down the bench, refusing to meet my eyes. Nathan? Caitlin was hesitant. I saw Chris turn around at the sound of her voice, but I had eyes only for Caitlin. Good morning, Angel, I greeted her with a smile. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Behind me, I knew Chris was staring too. One arm was wound around the doorframe and the wall beyond, supporting her. Caitlin wore one of my jumpers, which reached almost to her knees, making her look like the child Chris had called her. The depths of her eyes told another story though, one that wasn't suitable for children. I took a step toward her, drawn closer by the irresistible black hole hint in her eyes. She gave a sheepish smile. Or perhaps it was rueful. I can't seem to be able to turn the taps on in the shower. She held up her hand and her fingers looked red. I'll be right there. I jumped up as if my chair was an ejector seat and coffee splashed over my hand. I almost dropped the cup but made it to the table in time. Shaking the coffee off my burnt fingers, I added, just as soon as I finish my coffee. Thank you. Her eyes lingered a moment before she left. Chris barely waited a few seconds for her to get out of earshot before she spoke. You didn't. She was right and I hadn't. I'd come damn close though, and I wasn't telling her that either. Caitlin, oh my God Caitlin, it was worth every sleepless screaming night just for last night. And there'd be more. I responded with only a smile. One that said there's chocolate for dinner and nothing else. You're a bloody cradle snatcher. And don't get any ideas, you aren't, and you'll never be Prince Charming, she shouted at me. I tipped the rest of my coffee down the sink, then stalked to the door. Just leave her alone. You should take your own advice, she said with venom. Go on, go help her, she probably can't even reach the taps. Bloody Chris didn't know when to keep her mouth shut. After a night like last night, the last thing I wanted to do was argue, couldn't she see that? To stop myself from shouting back in kind, I left. Just outside the door I almost stepped on Caitlin, sitting on the floor. She didn't say anything. She just looked up at me with big sad eyes, and I held out my hands to help her to her feet. I walked her to the bathroom, where she sat on the edge of the bath to watch me. I closed the door, then turned the taps on for her. She came up behind me, her hands sliding under my shirt. Why don't you set her straight? You could just tell her how old I am, it's hardly a secret. I know. My voice was muffled as she pulled my shirt over my head. Then why did you let her say what she did without defending yourself? She likes to argue. That's why she wants to do law. I shrugged. I don't want to argue with her. It would end in me telling her things she doesn't need to know, about you and about me. I closed my eyes, trying to squeeze my mental images out of existence. Caitlin had taken my jumper off, and the touch of her bare skin against my back was more than a little distracting. Would you like me to help you in the shower? I couldn't resist saying. That would be lovely, Nathan. She sounded like she was smiling. 82. I offered to make her breakfast, but Caitlin said she wasn't all that hungry. She kept quiet as I helped her dress in some new clothes she'd bought yesterday, so we could both hear Chris crashing dishes around in the sink. I was more than happy to avoid the kitchen until Chris was out of it, but Caitlin insisted she wanted to speak to her. I grabbed the wet towels to hang them outside, telling Caitlin she could call me in if she needed anything. So I was outside with a clear view into the kitchen when she walked in. Chris couldn't miss Caitlin entering the kitchen this time, a beacon of glowing white as the bright sunlight touched her t-shirt, but my sister didn't let on. Caitlin turned the kettle on and began hunting through the cupboards. He's not even making you breakfast? Chris said suddenly over her shoulder, not looking at Caitlin. Caitlin glanced at her, then looked away. No, I talked him out of it. She stared at her in surprise. How did you manage that? It's difficult to talk him out of anything. Caitlin laughed, her face lighting up in that irresistible way she had. Difficult? He's as stubborn as a mule. Chris broke into a smile. Well, yes. She laughed too. Caitlin stuck out her hand. I'm Caitlin. Nathan seemed too preoccupied to introduce me before. Though she tried to hide it, her hand still hurt her, and I saw her wince as the pressure of Chris's handshake bordered on painful. I'm Chris, his sister, as you've probably already been told. She saw the look on Caitlin's face. Shit, are you alright? No, but I will be one day, Caitlin said pleasantly as she pulled her hand away. At that, Chris pushed Caitlin down onto one of the chairs and made coffee for her. When Caitlin protested, Chris said bluntly, It still hurts you to walk, doesn't it? Not as much as it did at first, but it still does a bit, she admitted reluctantly. My heart constricted in my chest. She tried so hard not to let the pain show, but I knew. Does he even know? Chris said, half under her breath. Look, I don't know what you've been through, what they've done to you or anything. Just don't assume he's some kind of Prince Charming because he rescued you. He's nowhere near perfect, he'll probably just end up hurting you, breaking your heart. He's good at that. She sounded bitter. I frowned. What in hell did she know about broken hearts? I'd never hurt anyone. I'd never hurt Caitlin. Do you think badly of me for staying last night? Caitlin asked her quietly. "No, it's him," she broke off, then passionately began again. "What you want to do is your business, and you're not the first." Caitlin tried to say something, but Chris went on. "Not the first girl he's ever brought home, I mean. He'd come in late, not alone, and she'd be gone by morning. I've never seen or heard the same girl twice, except when they called to try to get in contact with him again." I hid my smile. Alana used to deal with those phone calls, some mad girls I'd slept with who thought we had a future, though I'd made it perfectly clear there wouldn't be one. I was just that good in bed that they wanted more. It wasn't my fault they weren't up to par. Alana used to give me an earful about it afterwards. Maybe Chris had heard it once or twice. "It's been a long time since he brought anyone home, but I'd have thought he'd know better than to seduce you or play on what he did for you. After all you've been through, you don't need him to hurt you as well." Chris looked fiercely at me outside, and I pretended to be very busy with the towels. Chris sat down at the table by Caitlin, handing her a coffee. There was silence for a few minutes while they both drank. Caitlin broke it. "I'm the same age as you. He told me about you, so I knew." When had I told her about Chris? "Just don't let him hurt you," Chris repeated, staring at Caitlin as though she could see bruises. Oh hell, was there a mark where the needle went in? Was she looking at her fingers? I could have sworn the swelling had gone down. Preoccupied, I didn't notice that Caitlin had been silent, her head bowed. "He said he never wanted to see me hurt." Her voice shook. When I'd said that, she'd been unconscious in hospital. What else was she remembering? This could only end in tears. I swore and headed inside. Chris had pushed a box of tissues across the table to her, but Caitlin hadn't noticed. The tears just kept on coming. I took one look at Caitlin's face and dropped to my knees next to her, arms around her, letting her cry against me. "What did you say to her?" I demanded of Chris. I don't know." She sounded puzzled, and I looked up to see her staring at Caitlin, a look of astonishment on her face. Caitlin stretched her arm out to take a tissue and used it. "I don't think I want breakfast anymore. I want to go home." "Are you sure?" I asked. "I'll be right," Caitlin said fiercely, to herself as much as to us. 83. Caitlin unlocked the front door and turned to me, pressing her lips briefly against my cheek. "See you tonight for dinner?" I stopped dead. "Don't you want me to stay with you?" She shrugged. "I'll probably just be writing more of my memories down and doing some washing. Maybe catch up on the sleep I missed out on last night." Her smile was enough to remind me of things that were better than sleep. "I feel bad that I take up so much of your time. Like the rest of your life is on hold for me." Right now, her safety was my life. Nothing was more important to me. I'd sound like a real idiot if I said it though, so I smiled and said, "I definitely don't mind." "Are you sure though? I mean, what will you do if the last of the bastards come for you while I'm not here?" Her surprise made me feel stupid. "Call the police, of course, like you did last time. After all, they were so efficient. I'm sure they'd be just as helpful again." "The police did fuck all last time, that was us." I tried to find a way of saying it inoffensively, but came up blank before I realized that she didn't know, and I had to keep it that way. "I'm sure they will," I said, summoning a smile. "You know my number if you need me to." "So dinner?" Caitlin looked relieved. "Dinner. See you tonight." She left me standing on the doorstep as she shut the door. Feeling stupid, I trudged back to my car. After a few minutes driving, I still didn't know where to go or what to do. On Saturday, Chris would still be home, and I definitely wanted to avoid my sister today. My job was to protect Caitlin as much as she'd permit, so I didn't have work to do after she'd dismissed me for the day. My life was on hold while I protected hers, and I wouldn't get my life back until it was over. I wasn't stupid enough to think it could go back to what it was, no matter how much I wished for it. Before Mum and Dad made names for themselves as successful investment advisors in Dubai. It sounded so simple, telling a wealthy investor that if he invested his money in businesses known to support terrorist activity, he'd lose it. It wasn't that simple, of course, as Dad had explained on his last visit. For our advice to mean anything, we have to know which businesses support violent extremist activity and demonstrate with extensive data the resulting losses, he'd said, lining up his points like ducks crossing a road. With the numbers to back us up from Marion's PhD project and the glowing reviews of satisfied customers, it was just a matter of the right introductions. Alana had laughed at him as she shook her head. Her laugh had been deeper than Caitlin's, more a throaty chuckle, I remembered fondly. But Dad, you're forgetting that violent extremists use religion as their basis for action. Aren't the businessmen anxious to save their souls by investing in a religious cause? Dad's laugh had matched hers, maybe the last time it ever would. The successful ones are more concerned with the state of their bank balance than that of their soul, plus they feel that taking money from people in the West is revenge enough. He'd explained how he'd speak to the men and Mum would sound out the women, for wealthy wives had money to invest too. If they hadn't been so successful, maybe Alana would still be alive. One too many investors had stopped giving money to some group who decided they didn't like their funding drying up. They hadn't gone after Mum and Dad, they'd threatened their children. A threat Mum and Dad had ignored. After all, you're all safe in Australia, Dad had laughed over Skype. First Alana disappeared. No word, no sign, nothing. Then the gory envelopes arrived at home, as I tried to hide them from Chris. She'd had final exams to focus on, and so had I. She'd done well, of course. She'd channeled her worry into study, and it showed. Yet I'd failed, my thoughts on Alana at the exams she should have attended with me. Receiving the results of DNA tests, confirming the envelope contents were from Alana. Grave-looking police officers, always offering sympathy, as there was nothing else they could do that they hadn't already. The message was clear, no one's safe no matter how far away. Yet Dad said she'd turn up. Alana always did because she was so good, so perfect, a fighter to the last. Mum and Dad refused to capitulate. Their business model was too good. There was too much money to be made in doing the right thing to give in to terrorists. The kidnappers would realize they had no choice but to release Alana. When are terrorists ever reasonable? I got sick of the positive fucking spin. Endless repetition of, Alana will appear. She always does. She did. The call came to my mobile, to come and identify her. I didn't tell Chris. I didn't call Mum or Dad, far away and far from concerned. I stood and stared at the corpse of my sister, as the images seared themselves into every layer of my consciousness, never to leave me. Leaving only ashes and a smouldering desire for revenge. I'd resolved to make the bastards who took my twin pay in tears of blood. The most terrifying thing is losing those you love. Mum and Dad did mourn. We all did. We just didn't do enough. One sister gone, I dreaded losing Chris next. I was the only man home, it was my job to protect them and I'd already failed. I couldn't fail again. Time to get fucking proactive. The ASIO team started asking questions, so I started with them. I was going to help, whether they paid me or not. In the end, they gave in just to stop me from interfering in their operation. Gotta catch them all. Almost. God, almost. So close and so fucking frustrating. My hands tightened on Alana's steering wheel. Mine now. What if they got to Caitlin while I wasn't there? I decided to go to the gym. I wanted to punch things. I'd never worked so hard with a speedball. I lost count and didn't stop till I couldn't see, there was so much sweat streaming down my face. I mopped my face with a towel and moved on to weights. Lifting Caitlin so often meant I wasn't completely out of practice, so I was pleased not to need to drop the weight down much. I did a few extra sets, just to make up for the time I'd been away. I refilled my water bottle, nodding to some of the familiar faces I hadn't seen in a while. Mine wasn't a social gym, all the battles were personal, except when you worked with a personal trainer. The guys who grunted and sobbed as they did bicep curls with a barely loaded barbell didn't last long in my gym. They soon found somewhere else to train. I finished up with intervals on the treadmill, starting out easy and then turning up the gradient. I ran till I ran out of water before heading home for a shower. Chris had already left the house by then, thank God. Showered and freshly dressed, I watched TV until it was time to go back to Caitlin's. We had Japanese for dinner, and Caitlin cried when she couldn't handle the chopsticks. I threw them out and fed her sushi with my fingers until she laughed again. Of course, that didn't happen until my eyes were streaming from finishing up the wasabi in one mouthful. She could have warned me. She let me ditch the pajamas but not my shorts. I wasn't complaining. I still got to sleep with her. And the next night. And the one after that. I wished I hadn't spent so much time at the gym that first session, because everything fucking hurt like I'd been in a fight and lost. It got better though. After 3 days I upped the weights. It felt damn good. The gym had to replace the speed ball and my six-pack was starting to return. For 2 days and nights I rinsed and repeated gym, shower, clothes, TV, back to Caitlin's. I could hear the child practicing the piano again each day as I climbed out of the car. The same song over and over, but it sounded smoother and more like music now. Everything coming together to turn something rough and awkward into something pleasurable. Maybe tonight, I thought as I walked stiffly up the steps to Caitlin's front door. 84. Caitlin smiled when she saw me. She let me in and offered me a drink. I took it and drank deeply, my bicep burning with fatigue as I lifted my arm. "What did you do today?" I asked, wondering. "Writing down more memories. Getting reacquainted with some of my music." Caitlin trailed off vaguely and my attention wavered until I realized she was looking at me expectantly. "Sorry?" I asked, embarrassed at being caught out for not listening. "I think I need to give a press interview," Caitlin said, looking frightened at the thought. "Why?" I asked. "We've avoided the press as much as possible with the help of the police, because you didn't want any publicity. Besides, what about the ones still left who hurt you? What if they see the interview and come after you? After that night in the nightclub where everyone recognized me, what's the point of me trying to hide? They already know what I look like. I won't be able to fade into my life again." She sounded near tears and I thought I understood why. "And I owe it to you. Every request I've had for an interview wants the fairy tale story, the one with a hero in it. And no one knows who you are and what you did. Because I don't want them to," I thought, but didn't say. "You don't owe me anything. I was in the right place at the right time to help you. Anyone would have done the same. Like the helpful guy in the club who attacked that bloke, who almost attacked you. I don't want that to happen again. This isn't a story I want to tell, but it's not just mine, Nathan. I want to make sure people know what you did for me. I don't want to see you framed because you helped me." She sounded firm, but she looked like she was holding something back. I assumed it was tears, but there was more. "I need your help to do it, Nathan. They want to interview not just me but you too." No. That was my first thought, and the second too. I'd lose my job was the third, followed by, did I really want to do this job anymore now that it's over? I could go back to uni next year. I realized what else was bothering me and voiced it. "You don't like telling anyone what happened. How could you give an interview about it?" She bit her lip and her voice was barely audible. "Because if I do this, I won't need to tell it again. Everyone will know and I'll only need to tell it once." And there it was. No matter what I felt about it, no matter how much either of us didn't want to do it, we both would, so that I would know she'd never have to go through it again. I still couldn't get her face out of my mind, that day in hospital when she first started telling me what she remembered so I could take it down. The way she'd cried torrents without stopping, as if something inside her had ruptured and spilled out through her eyes. I'd do anything to know she never had to hurt like that again. "If you really want to do this, I'll help you," I told her. "But we'll tell the press crew that there are conditions to make this easier for you." And I'd be there every step of the way, so I'd hear everything she had to say. I couldn't lose my job over that. I was still supposed to gather information. Even if it was in a TV studio. Fuck, how did I get into this mess? 85. Remember, we set conditions, I told Caitlin in a low voice as we drove to the TV station 2 days later. This isn't live, they'll tape it and cut it, so there's no audience. I won't answer many questions, but I'll be there for you, for photos too if you like. I had misgivings about any photos or filming, but it was part of the deal. If they ask anything that upsets you, you don't have to answer. You can end the interview when you're ready. If it gets too much, we can end it. If I've had enough, end it, she murmured to herself as she clutched my arm. Together, we walked into the studio buildings. I was nervous as hell, and I couldn't imagine how much bigger the butterflies were in Caitlin's tummy. She'd promised to tell the story, she hadn't even told me. The receptionist's eyes widened when Caitlin gave her name, murmuring about makeup as she hurried off, waving frantically for us to follow her. Caitlin's expression tightened. I could feel her fear through her fingers pressed firmly into my forearm, but she didn't falter as she followed. At least she didn't draw blood this time. A round little woman dressed all in black directed proceedings in the dressing room. You, makeup, she barked at me, pointing at a chair in front of a mirror framed with lights. It might have looked like a starlet's dressing room in a movie, if 3 of the light globes hadn't blown. I sat down cautiously, resolving to raise merry hell if they turned me into a drag queen or a baby-faced teen idol. Another black-clad girl started swiping a sponge across my cheeks, as if she was trying to sand the stubble back into my skin. I'd shaved this morning, so it wasn't like it was too bad today. Right, get her undressed. We'll try the blue first. I looked at the room reflected in front of me. The round woman stood with her hands on her hips as 3 other girls circled Caitlin like a flock of magpies, a combination of sweet song and sharp beaks. Hands plucked at her shirt. Caitlin shrank away, her arms curled across her body. No, please. Her eyes were wide with terror and turned to me. Please? I stood up and shooed the magpie girls away as I strode through them. Let me help you, Angel, I said softly. I took her shaking hands in mine and touched my lips to hers. Need to get changed, twittered one of the girls. I didn't turn to see which one. My eyes never leaving Caitlin's, I shifted my fingers to her shirt. I smoothly undid the buttons and slid the shirt off her shoulders. There were gasps as the girls saw the scars on Caitlin's back, but I ignored them for my eyes were busy holding hers. I eased it down, baring her arms and her bra, and I heard a muffled sob from one of the nameless girls. Angel, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You don't have to tell this story to anyone. I can take you home if you want. I took her hands again and kissed her fingers. Caitlin's eyes were dark dry wells. Her tone was equally deep. No. I can do this. She pulled her hands from mine and gritted her teeth as she undid her pants, letting them slide to the floor. Her pink underwear matched her scars perfectly. In the mirror behind her, I saw the shaken round woman say, Not the blue. Too much skin. The mulberry, I think. Even her voice shook. One of the girls nodded, wiping her eyes as she hung the blue dress up and reached for something in purple. The room was so silent I heard her every footstep on the vinyl until she passed the purple dress to me. I helped Caitlin slip the dress over her head, the skirt falling to just below her knees. May I? Asked a quiet voice beside me. Caitlin nodded silently to the girl, who wiped her eyes once more and started to adjust Caitlin's dress so it sat perfectly. Caitlin stood like a statue of fortitude, frozen and unflinching, yet still I worried. Are you sure? I asked. This time Caitlin nodded only once. Yes, Nathan. I know what I can take. Get some makeup on, because the interview questions will be harder than just getting dressed. I need you. Her fearful eyes lingered on mine, showing the terror the rest of her body hid beneath her stiff stance. I sat back down, watching her reflection carefully until Caitlin was led to the chair beside mine. I reached out and took her hand, smiling at her. Done, said the makeup artist with considerable relief. I looked in the mirror at her work. I was relieved to see I still looked like me. If it weren't for the Vaseline she'd brushed on my lips, I could ignore the fact that I was wearing makeup at all. "You need to change your shirt," the round woman told me, her voice quieter than her first command. "For you, the cornflower." I turned to see what sort of flowers I was expected to wear, but the girl held only a light blue striped shirt. I shrugged out of my own and put on the proffered one. The fabric felt thick and crisp against my skin, like my good suit shirts that I only wore on special occasions. I guess this was one of them. The day Caitlin told the country what had happened to her. I looked to Caitlin, her eyes closed as the girl took a brush to her eyes, darkening lids and lashes with careful strokes. Reaching for Caitlin's hand again, I was quick to press my lips to her fingers before she could pull them out of my grasp. Of course, I got Vaseline all over them and felt stupid, so I started to apologize. "It's okay, Nathan," Caitlin cut me off, then was silent as the makeup artist painted her lips the same purple-pink as her dress. "There you go, sweetheart," she said, standing back and smiling with considerable pride. Caitlin's eyes fluttered open. My breath caught in my throat. "You look beautiful, Angel." Her slight smile was enough to lift my heart. "Thank you, Nathan." She stood stiffly, holding still to have her dress arranged around her once more before she held out her hand to me. I took it, and we were ushered into the studio to tape the interview. A bloke wearing a headset told us to sit down, pointing at the armchairs arranged in a semicircle. Caitlin sank down in relief on one. One of the magpie girls swooped in to tweak Caitlin's dress and hair so that everything was perfectly in place. Caitlin didn't let go of my hand, so I sat beside her while the dolled-up interviewer sat on her other side. The interviewer looked vaguely familiar, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember her name. She'd evidently been warned not to attempt to shake Caitlin's hand, so she just sat and smiled at us while people scurried around the two women, making sure they looked their best. Caitlin looked pale, which only served to draw more attention to her big dark eyes. I caught sight of what she looked like on camera on the screens in front of us, a hauntingly beautiful woman I ached to make mine. I looked over at her and she turned those eyes on me. "Help me," they said, as she looked more vulnerable than she ever had before. "I'm here for you," I promised her. The interviewer cleared her throat and we looked to her. The questions began. As she asked Caitlin the first question, my stomach clenched in the worst case of stage fright I'd had since primary school. I forced my face into sympathetic blankness as Caitlin told what she remembered, being kept in the dark, men hurting her. I let the words wash over me, trying not to visualize the vague events she'd described in more detail on Alana's laptop. She wasn't asked to elaborate. Instead, the interviewer asked how she felt and prompted her when Caitlin appeared lost for words. "I wanted to kill them all, but I knew I couldn't," Caitlin said at one point. "Sometimes I just wanted to die so that the pain would end." Her eyes filled with tears then, but she squeezed my fingers and with iron self-control she didn't cry, blinking the tears away. "And then I woke up and Nathan was there. He told me it was over and they weren't going to hurt me again. It seemed too good to be true, so I didn't believe him at first." Her watery smile left me wishing I could comfort her. As if her words were some sort of cue, it was my turn. "How did you find her?" the interviewer asked me. I took a deep breath, trying to unlock my jaw to answer. I'd prepared a response for this, and I had to get the words out. "Do it for Caitlin." I looked at her beautiful brave face and found courage I didn't know I possessed. The power to open my mouth. I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk on the beach. I saw someone lying on the sand, and when I approached she didn't move, so at first I thought she was dead. Caitlin's huge eyes were on me, worried. Still she smiled. I asked her if she was okay, but she didn't answer. Now her eyes held sadness. She was very cold and barely conscious, so I called an ambulance and got a first aid kit from my car while we waited for help to arrive. Caitlin pressed her lips together, giving the slightest nod. This was the hardest part. Slowly. She woke up before the ambulance arrived. She was so scared. I swallowed as I looked at her, remembering what I could never forget. The interviewer's voice broke through my memories. "What was the first thing you said to her?" "I'm sorry. Oh God, so sorry." I told her it was over and that I was there to help. One look at Caitlin's watery smile made me continue. She asked me to stay with her in the ambulance and the hospital, because she was afraid to be alone. The image came to my mind then of what she'd looked like when she'd said that, and I stared at her now, trying to replace the hellish image I remembered with the vision I saw now. "She's amazing," I blurted out. No matter how much pain she was in, she never stopped fighting to live, to get better. Anything else would mean they'd won. Caitlin looked so deep in thought she didn't seem to know what she wanted to say. Her lips formed words but no sound came out. She tried again and I barely caught the words, her voice was so quiet. "End it." I dragged my eyes from Caitlin to the interviewer. "This interview is finished," I told her, as Caitlin and I stood up together. I moved closer to Caitlin so I could support her before she walked too far. She stood still for a moment, her arms resting on mine as mine held her. She looked up at me slowly, a smile on her face. She brought her lips up to mine and kissed me. Her gaze never wavered from my face, even as her heels touched the ground again and the kiss ended. "Beautiful," came a voice from behind us. I turned my head a little to see a cameraman flip 2 emphatic thumbs up. Caitlin sagged in my arms, squeezing her eyes shut, more exhausted than I'd realized. "I'll take you home if you like, Angel," I said softly. She nodded wearily, leaning heavily on me as I escorted her out. "End it." The words echoed in my head as I desperately hoped they didn't inspire the same memories in Caitlin as they did in me. 86. An interview. "You gave a fucking television interview." His name was Paul Mott. It said so on his door. An ordinary name for an ordinary bloke, the boss who was yelling at me for fucking up this entire operation from start to finish. This time in person and not by phone. I'd failed. I didn't get all of them. Caitlin would never be safe and I'd never stop worrying. "It won't be broadcast until Friday," I replied. "You still have time to pull the interview. You can contact the TV station and ask them not to air it." I kept my face blank, fighting a smile. "Tell the news that they can't show an exclusive interview they paid for?" "Fuck Nathan, they'd have a field day with that one." He glared at me. "How much did they offer you?" I met his gaze squarely. "I don't know. I didn't ask for or accept any payment. I believe they offered money to Caitlin and she accepted it. Money to support her through her studies. A tiny amount of compensation for what she'd been through. Millions couldn't make up for her time in hell." "What questions did they ask you?" My breath hissed through my teeth. "They asked how I found her." "And you said?" His voice was dead flat and dangerous. "Nothing about the police, shots fired, or even the other bloke on the beach. I didn't say which beach or how we knew she'd be there. I said I stumbled across the poor girl, lying on the sand, all alone. You know you can't be working for us when it airs. You're no use to us as some hero everyone's seen on TV. Any hope you had of continuing your contract died the minute you walked into that TV studio. And the moment you opened your mouth, you voided the contract anyway." My face was stony. I was already photographed with her at the hospital. I had to go in to find out what she'd say about what she remembered. She said less than I did, and that's saying something. Half the interview is her describing her feelings about what they did to her. Fuck, that's something no one should hear. I answered questions to back up her vague story so they'd believe it. That's all. I looked at him, about as angry as I'd ever been at any boss, no matter what the job. "The contract ends tomorrow. Let me keep her safe for one more day. And try to find a way to get her to let me stay for longer than that. If it was anyone else, I'd say fix it or I'll fire you, for it's not fucking hard." His eyes burned with anger. "But you can finish up tomorrow along with your contract. I don't want any more fuck-ups, so you'll be handing over all your gear, weapons, body armor, the works today. I don't want to see you back here." I nodded, knowing I couldn't ask for any more. "Do we have any more leads on the rest of them? Please tell me so I know what to look out for to keep her safe, even when it's not my job anymore." He sighed. "Our team has been through Laura's house from one end to the other and nothing. We have her computer files, but no one's managed to break into those yet. The only records she kept on paper are in a diary she had in her handbag. She occasionally made reference to contact with someone she called Al-Hamar, but we haven't managed to work out who he or they are. Once we have access to her computer, we'll call in the translators and see what they make of it. If we don't close this operation properly, we'll look like right asses. What if they come after Caitlin tomorrow when I'm unarmed?" I asked. He snorted. "Let her take care of them. She has a pretty good track record so far, maybe better than yours." I didn't laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just tightened my jaw and left. I had a gun to hand in and a shitload of worry to carry, with nowhere to offload it. 87. I arrived early at Caitlin's. It was still mid-afternoon, but I didn't want to stay away from her any longer. My head was too filled with dread for her safety when we were apart. I dragged myself up her front steps, trying to pull myself together into some semblance of company for her, instead of the wet dish rag I felt like. It was piano lesson day, it seemed. The child I'd heard practicing the piano for the last fortnight had played a very simple song, but the virtuoso who played what I barely recognized as the same song must have been the child's teacher, demonstrating how something so simple could become a complex masterpiece. For the second time that day, I felt like crying. Caitlin and I were right there at the child's skill level, our relationship working well enough to appear to be music. Would she survive long enough for us to take it further, to be this symphony we could be together? I wanted it, God, I wanted it, almost as much as I wanted Caitlin herself. I couldn't wait any longer. I knocked on her door, dying to see Caitlin again. The piano-played song ended in silence. The music lesson was over for the day, it seemed. Oh God, please don't let anything else be over. Not yet. I heard Caitlin's steps creak on the boards in the hall before she opened the door. "Nathan, you're early." Her eyes lit up and she threw her arms around me, delivering a delightful kiss. My heavy heart lifted a little and I felt my smile return. "Angel," I murmured, not wanting to let go. She was the only light I could see, even with the sun still in the sky. She laughed as she pulled away from me. "Come on in." I was thinking about an afternoon snack and the cheese looked really good. She took my hand and pulled me inside, leading the way laughingly to the kitchen. From the fridge she pulled out something small enough to hold in her hand and proffered it. Nestled in her palm was a small cheese coated in black wax. "Joe and I bought it this morning and I wanted to share it with you." She flitted around the kitchen, pulling out a cutting board and a wicked little knife. Caitlin stretched up onto her toes to reach the crackers in a high cupboard above the bench, but her balance was perfect. She took the knife and touched the point to the wax. "Let me help you with that," I offered, worrying about her hurting her hands by handling a knife and hard cheese. Caitlin shook her head, still laughing. Her fingers were quick. With a few deft strokes she'd peeled the wax from the little cheddar and laid it naked on the cutting board. I watched her carefully as she started to slice the cheese, but Caitlin didn't show the slightest sign of any pain. She's really recovering, I realized. My heart lifted a little more. Caitlin held out a cracker, topped with a freshly cut slice of cheese. She popped another in her mouth, smiling as I took her offering. I crunched my way through what was good cheese. Better still was the cheese-flavored kiss Caitlin followed it up with. Her smile was almost infectious. "What would you like to do tonight?" I found my grin again. "I'll leave that entirely up to you. Dinner, maybe?" I was thinking about going out to the Hawkers. I want to try with chopsticks again. I needed to ask her out for tomorrow night. Plan a special dinner and maybe something else after, anything to get her to let me stay again tomorrow. I opened my mouth to suggest it and the phone rang. Caitlin looked surprised and picked up. "Hello?" Her eyes widened as she listened. "Is your wife feeling better? She had a cold last time I spoke to you. The kids didn't get it too, did they?" She listened for a little longer, nodding a little. "You want me to hang on?" She put the phone down on the bench and hit the speakerphone button. "Sorry, Detective McGinnis, I'm in the kitchen so I just stuck you on speakerphone. Now, what was that about me coming in to identify someone?" Our eyes met and my mouth wouldn't close. Caitlin didn't need the memories of dead bodies on top of the other horrible memories she had. Who did she know who died? "Some of these bodies were found last night in a place that links them to your kidnapping. We'd like you to take a look at them and see if you recognize them. We've already identified 4 of them, with one family member coming in tomorrow to confirm the last identification. We'd like you to come in on Monday too." Caitlin was shaking her head, and I understood her denial completely. She shouldn't need to do this. "Detective, I can't come in on Monday. I fly out tomorrow night." "What?" Caitlin's eyes were on the cheese as she carefully cut another slice. "So the latest I could come in would be tomorrow afternoon. How about right after lunch? Or is that too early?" She turned her eyes expectantly to the phone, as if she could see through the plastic and phone lines to the detective himself. "We have a relative coming in at 2, so maybe at 3? Would that be too late for you? It's probably best that you don't meet him, especially if you identify his son as one of the men who—" He coughed. Caitlin glanced at me and then away before I could say anything. "That's probably a good idea. Can I bring a friend along with me, for moral support? Her fingers slid between mine, squeezing lightly. I looked at Caitlin to find her questioning eyes on me. I nodded in response. Of course. Any support she needed and I'd be there. Even the detective sounded sympathetic. Of course. Whoever you need. I realize this is difficult for you. Is there any chance you've remembered more than you told me the last time we met? That kind of information could be really useful. He trailed off. Caitlin's eyes went to the cheese as she sliced a fair bit more. I felt each stroke of the knife seemed a bit harder than the last. I'll bring along what I have. It's just as much of my memories as I could recollect. Not really in the kind of format you're after, but I've tried to group them into people, places, and days. He was silent. I could hear him clearing a dry throat before he could speak. Of course. Thank you. Anything you have for us would be wonderful. We really appreciate any new information you can provide. See you tomorrow. He waited for Caitlin's goodbye before he hung up. My mouth was still open and I didn't know what to ask first. Of course, Caitlin did. Nathan, would you please come with me to the police station tomorrow? I don't want to do this alone. My answer was immediate, without thought. Of course. I'll hold your hand no matter what. She smiled and took another slice of cheese, savoring the taste with her eyes closed. Are you really flying somewhere tomorrow? I blurted out, my voice sounding really forlorn. Her eyes snapped open. Yes. Joe told me this morning while we were shopping for clothes. If you're really lucky, I may show you later. Caitlin winked as she pulled down the shoulder of her shirt. I caught a glimpse of satin and lace before she covered her bra again. The trip is my birthday present. She and Dad arranged with all of my friends to pay for me to have a holiday. She's coming too. She wouldn't even tell me where, except that we'll be going clothes shopping, so she told me to pack light for warm weather with underwear for 2 weeks, and I'll find out at the airport tomorrow. Caitlin looked so excited I couldn't bear to be anything but happy for her. She did deserve a holiday. Just you and Joe? I inquired, not game to ask what I really wanted. She laughed. Yes, that's what Joe said. A girls' trip, now we're both old enough to travel alone. She looked sympathetic. I'll be back in 2 weeks, Nathan. It's not like anyone will be following me, even I don't know where I'm going. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to go with her, but there was no way in hell I was going to say it. I pasted a smile on my face. So I only get you today and tomorrow? How would you feel about getting into the vodka tonight after dinner, and we'll see what happens? I'd better make sure you enjoy yourself so you don't forget me while you're away on holiday. Caitlin's kiss was long and lingering. I'll never forget you, Nathan. You saved my life, remember? And then stole my ice cream. Her smile was impish. Come on, let's take the cheese and crackers to the lounge room. Jo lent me some DVDs of her brother's, a TV series she said was really funny. It's about some secret agent who works with computers. The cutting board in one hand and the box of crackers in the other, she led the way out of the kitchen. Some hours later, when the episodes on the DVD faded to warning messages in a dozen different languages, I looked around. The coffee table was littered with the takeaway hawker food we'd eventually ordered, along with the empty vodka mixes we'd drunk afterwards. Caitlin snuggled closer to me, letting out a little contented sigh in her sleep. Smiling, I shifted her into my arms and staggered to my feet to carry Caitlin off to bed. I considered waking her to ask about the very pretty underwear she'd tempted me with earlier, but I decided against it. I settled for sleeping with her in the somnolent sense tonight. I didn't know when I'd get another good night's sleep, what with worrying about her while she was away from me. At least I knew that anywhere else would be safer than here. 88. Caitlin was so worried about getting to the state mortuary on time that we arrived way too early. It was easier to humor her than argue. I'd never seen her so nervous, not even before the interview. In the waiting room, she hopped from chair to chair, convinced that she wasn't comfortable in what looked to me to be identical seats. When she settled in one for more than a minute, I shifted to the one beside her and slung an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, Angel," I murmured, pressing my lips to the top of her head. I could feel her bouncing a little with a rhythm only she could hear. She didn't reply, for her eyes were fixed on a lost-looking old bloke standing by the reception desk. I hadn't seen him come in, but Caitlin couldn't stop staring at him. The poor old guy noticed her staring, and his eyes grew wide as he looked at Caitlin. The receptionist saw him and stood up, moving around the desk to stand by his side. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Dennis. Would you like me to call you a taxi, or did you drive today?" She walked with the man out the doors to the car park outside. She returned after a few minutes, looking sad. "He must have lost his wife, poor bloke," I thought. I looked at Caitlin. Her eyebrows were down and her forehead was wrinkled. I stretched out a hand to smooth the skin, stroking her hair too. "Don't worry, Angel. We'll be out of here soon." Her smile was tight as it turned up her mouth, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as me. "You're right, Nathan. It'll be okay." I didn't want to think what would happen if circumstances conspired to make it any less than okay. Footsteps sounded on vinyl, and the detective I'd last seen trying to interrogate Caitlin in hospital stepped up to the reception desk. The receptionist said something to him, too soft for me to hear, before he turned to look at us. "You're early," he said with some surprise. Caitlin pressed her lips together, looking at the floor, so I answered. Caitlin really wanted to get this over with, and I was worried about parking, so we made sure we had plenty of time to get here. "And she brought you for moral support," he went on, as if I hadn't spoken. "Yes, I did, Detective," Caitlin said with a sweet, sad smile. "I couldn't do this without Nathan." She held out her hand, a CD case clutched between two fingers. "This is what you asked for, my memories." I looked longingly at the CD, wondering how to ask her for a copy, but I didn't say a word. "Thank you," he said in wonder, tucking it into the folder he held stiffly at his side. "Shall we?" My arm tightened protectively around Caitlin as she stood up, and I did the same. She leaned against me for comfort as we followed the detective deeper into the building. He led us to a waiting room for the bereaved, the same place where I'd waited to see Alana one last time. It was my turn to hold on to Caitlin for comfort, but the pain wasn't as bad as I remembered. As if she'd filled the gap somehow. Caitlin's eyes looked up at me in surprise for a moment, before she settled closer into my embrace. Maybe it worked for both of us right now. The detective sat on the couch across from us, a manila folder in his hands. He cleared his throat. I have some pictures for you. Can you tell me if you recognize any of these people? He opened it and held up a photo. Laura in life. She pushed me into her car, the red Mercedes, Caitlin said in a flat tone. He scribbled notes quickly. Laura's photo disappeared into the bottom of the file. The next one was of a man, his eyes closed in death. The police officer who shot Nathan. He shot you too, Angel, I thought but didn't say. And later, he shot himself when he tried to shoot me again. The next photo showed a live man. I recognized it from the surveillance footage of the inside of Caitlin's house. Pete, the one who broke her fingers before I shot his face off, I thought with some satisfaction. I don't know, Caitlin said softly. She looked at the detective in consternation. I didn't see all of their faces. I remember other things about them in the dark. Their hands the size of them, what I? She took the photo from him and looked more closely at it. He broke my fingers. After I broke his nose. She sounded proud of it too. I smothered a smile. The next photo was of a dead man. The one who tried to walk away outside Caitlin's house. Tom, after I shot him in the back of the head as he heaped insults on her injuries. Caitlin shook her head. I don't know. Last one, the detective said as he pulled out one more photo of yet another waxy male corpse. This one had a bullet hole through his forehead, but the blood I remembered was gone. Caitlin's expression hardened. He was in the car. And on the beach that night? He slipped the photo back in the folder, leaving only Tom's photo out. So you've identified all of them except for this one. He shook the photo. What else do you remember about them? Caitlin screwed her face up, trying hard to remember. I bit someone's hand. I remember spitting out the mess. She pulled a face in distaste. He had some chunky rings on that cut my face when he hit me. Her voice was so devoid of emotion I could barely believe it. It was as though she'd locked the tears away for later. The detective looked as disconcerted as I felt. Well, that's why we're here, so you can identify the bodies if the photos aren't enough. Have you ever seen a corpse before? He looked intently at Caitlin, ignoring me entirely. If he had the surveillance photos, then he knew what my answer would be. Caitlin looked up at him, affronted. I'm studying medicine. Of course I've dissected a cadaver. She followed him without hesitation, her head held high. I followed more reluctantly, hoping to avoid my memories of this place. In the cool room, the detective opened up drawers, each occupied by a sheet-shrouded body. The hands were visible on either side though, and that's what Caitlin studied as she walked along the row of corpses. She stopped and pointed. That one. You can see the ridges and tan lines where the rings were, and there's a chunk missing on the side. Her face was firm as she waited for the detective to reach her. She flipped the sheet from the man's face and it was Tom, as dead as his picture. With a shrug, she covered him again. Are there any more? She asked, her face a mask of indifference. He looked shaken. His composure was no match for hers. No, that's all of them, he said with a sick smile. Thank you for your time. I'll walk you out. He hurried us out, looking like he couldn't be finished fast enough. Caitlin looked pale as we left the mortuary, but she had her teeth clenched and her expression was fierce. She was remarkably composed for someone who'd just been looking at corpses. Are you relieved? I asked. They can't hurt you anymore. No, she replied curtly. They'll never touch me again, but that's not all of them. Are you sure? I responded. There's one more man who hurt me. One they haven't got yet. She looked straight ahead as she said it, not looking at me. For the first time I struggled to keep up with her as she marched back to the car. But is he really a risk? The one they haven't got yet? She stopped to look up at me, her look incredulous. He hurt me. He wasn't the worst of them, but he still hurt me. I'm not safe until they have him. "Excuse me?" I turned to see the lost-looking old man approaching. There was no one else around, so I answered. "What is it?" "I'm sorry for your loss, mate, but we're in a hurry here." Caitlin had stopped moving. She was a frozen statue at my side, clutching at my arm. I felt a frisson of fear. He raised his gun and pointed it at us. "You killed my son. Give me the girl." "I don't know what you're talking about," I began. "I do," Caitlin cut me off. She glared at the old man. "Give me the girl," he insisted. All warmth drained from me as she let go of my arm and took a step toward him, lifting her hands to the height of her shoulders. Another step and another as I watched, helpless to stop her. "No, don't hurt her." I barely recognized the desperate voice as my own. I watched him lower the gun as she steadily approached. I wished Caitlin would look at me, to let me beg her not to do this. My voice died in my throat, terrified that she'd die before my eyes. She stood close enough to press her body against his, but he held the gun between them. I couldn't see if it was still pointed at her. I couldn't see her hands or his. The moment stretched forever. He broke the silence. "You killed my son." Caitlin shook her head. I heard the quiet murmur of her voice but not the words. Would they be her last? Please no. She lunged across the narrow space between them. If he'd had his gun pointed at her, it would have dug into her soft flesh. I heard the shot and was cowardly enough to close my eyes. I couldn't bear to watch Caitlin die. The slither and slump of a body hitting the bitumen. I could have cried when I heard the most heavenly sound in the world. Good riddance, Simon. I opened my eyes in time to see her spit on his corpse, the gun still clenched in his hand. She turned to smile at me. Pure spring sunshine. Now it's over and I'm safe. I stumbled toward her, my arms out to hold her to make sure she was real. She let me hug her before she straightened up and pulled away. I have to get to the airport, Nathan, she said. I looked at the body on the bitumen before my eyes bumped back to her. But you just please? Her hand slid into my pocket and pulled out my phone. You have friends to call to clean this up. That's what they're good at, isn't it? Tell them you have the last one. I stared at her, speechless. How long had she known? I need to get to the airport. May I borrow your car? I'll leave it at my house, with the keys on the table inside the front door. You know where I keep the spare house keys. You can get a lift with your colleagues, right? I'll drive you, I whispered. Caitlin shook her head. You have a dead body to deal with. I can drive home and Joe will pick me up from there. I pulled the keys wordlessly from my pocket and held them out. Alana wouldn't have hesitated, so neither did I. She dug into her handbag and pulled out a stack of folded paper, a little crumpled and crushed around the edges. This is what you wanted. My memories, as complete as I could make them. If you still want to see me when I return, I'll be back in 2 weeks. She smiled sadly as she traded the papers for my keys. Her lips lingered on my cheek. See you then. I waved in stunned wonder as I watched her drive off in Alana's convertible before I dialed Naveed. I had a shitload of explaining to do. Simon. Safe. It's over. Oh, Caitlin. 89. When I reached home 5 exhausting hours later, I pulled out the crumpled papers and sat with them, my eyes closed. If I read these, I'd know what happened in full, know how much she remembered and how much she'd managed to forget. Every painful moment of violence, abuse and neglect until I managed to help. I'd know what I was responsible for and how much guilt I'd have to live with for the rest of my life. I could wait. I had enough to be miserable over. My angel was winging her away across land and sea, away from me, and it'd be 2 weeks before I'd see her again. At least I knew she was safe, I told myself. Her nightmares were over. And mine had barely begun. I placed the papers carefully on my desk before I went to bed. Every time I opened my eyes, I could feel them burning a dark hole in my head, but I didn't touch them. In the morning, I dug out the keys to the red Mercedes Caitlin hated so much. I drove it to a car dealership and haggled half-heartedly with a used car dealer until he gave me a check in exchange for the keys and some signed forms. I trudged all the way home in a daze. It might have taken 3 minutes or 3 hours. I didn't care. I offered the check to Chris, telling her I was keeping Alana's car and I'd sold mine, so I owed her half the money. She snorted. "Keep it. You need it more than I do." She chewed her lip as if she was dying to say something. "Where's Caitlin? Did she finally kick you out?" I couldn't summon the energy to get angry at her. "No, she's off on a holiday somewhere with a friend. Girls' trip and I wasn't invited. I'm not anatomically equipped for days of clothes shopping and cocktails." She looked sad. "It's for the best, you know. She's not good for you." Of course she was. She was amazing and perfect for me, everything I'd ever wanted. Everything I didn't have. I didn't say it, she wouldn't listen anyway. I clicked on the TV and took a big bite of my lunch sandwich. Sawdust or salami or spinach, I didn't taste it and I didn't care. It was as dry as dust in my mouth anyway. I didn't look at the papers when I went to bed that night. A white beacon on my desk, waiting to drag me into the darkest depths of despair. I wondered if there was any such thing as a white hole, like a black hole, only camouflaged in color and light. Or carefully covered by a sheaf of pristine pages, lying in wait. We ran out of milk, so I ate my cornflakes dry. Soft and stale from sitting in the cupboard so long, untouched, I remembered how much Caitlin hated them. And why. I threw up the gooey orange mess into the sink, washing it away with a hissing stream of water. Wishing I could wash memories away like cornflakes. Like blood. The pages taunted me day and night. Sitting in a patch of sunlight through the window, glowing in moonlight much later, hidden by darkness and ever lurking. I should have just rung Naveed and handed them over. Never reading, never knowing. But I owed it to Caitlin to read what she gave me, to know what she went through. The least I could do. But not yet. I watched TV. Light blended into dark and I didn't leave the house. I focused on nothing but advertising, endless repetition of a dramatic voice, telling me that Caitlin would tell her story. The time, the day and the haunting picture they'd plastered over the papers. Her haunted eyes as she whispered, "End it." Over and over until I tried to reach out and touch her through the LCD screen. I wanted to steal an old TV from someone's verge, one with a dodgy picture that wasn't so clear and real. I didn't want to feel like I was in among the action. If I couldn't touch her, it was more torture than entertainment. The minutes ticked till the Friday when they'd show the complete interview. Or as much as they chose to. Friday night came and Chris was out. I spread out across the couch with a beer and waited. I tuned out through a story about cyberbullying. My beer was empty and I went to get another one when the story switched to some con artist who wouldn't say anything but swearing to the cameraman as they stalked his house. What else do you say to stalkers who won't leave you alone? Up next, miracle girl Caitlin Lockyer tells her story. A quick flash of her duckling photograph from the newspaper and an ad for cornflakes appeared. Fucking cornflakes. I went to get another beer, but we were out. I opened one of the lemon vodka things Caitlin had left here when she stayed over. When we'd end it, her voice said from the lounge room, and I ran back to the couch, only to find that it was an ad. A dancing dishcloth cleaned someone's house to upbeat music, as I thought about ringing the TV station to complain about the wait. I didn't do it. I drank a gulp of vodka, remembering the taste of it on Caitlin's tongue. I decided to order a copy of that photo in the morning. They hurt me. They came in the dark and hurt me. I couldn't understand it, why they'd want to, why they came back again. Only to hurt me. Her forlorn voice cut deep and I listened. She never used the words rape, break or cut, though that's what they did. Only hurt. All she ever said was that they hurt her, a word that haunted me more than the precise one she avoided. Please don't hurt me." My heart went out to her wherever she was, and for the first time I saw the interviewer's tears too. Yet Caitlin never cried, not a drop. She'd cried herself out in my arms, and she had no tears left to shed when she talked of hurt and dark. I stared at her angry-looking protector, knowing it was me in makeup, as the figure on the screen talked of how amazing she was and how she never gave up. If I'd known then what I knew now, that she could kill a man for what he did to her, no fear left, for she'd spent it all long before. Our kiss had the interviewer clapping and crying at the same time. I didn't remember her making a sound. Maybe they taped her response later. My strong suspicion was confirmed when she asked one more question that I know I never heard. "What were you thinking most in the pain and the dark?" Caitlin's whispered response was taken completely out of context. "End it." And the interview ended. No, she wasn't thinking that she wanted to end it, I fumed. She was thinking what she said so many times in her sleep: keep fighting. Don't let them win. Up next, a live performance from meteoric Melbourne band Chaya performing their debut single Necessary Evil, followed by an exclusive interview with their hot lead singer Jay. I clicked the TV off. "You didn't know her. You made her sound like a helpless little innocent instead of the fierce fighter she was. No matter what kind of hell she'd been through, there was nothing that could stop me from going to meet her again when she came home. Fuck it. I was going to read the whole thing in the morning. I owed it to her." 90. I finished my toast and sat down to read what Caitlin had given me. It was what I both hoped and dreaded, a detailed description of everything she remembered of her kidnapping, captivity, and afterwards. Every memory was preceded by a line of key words across the top in bold, a chilling summary of what was to come. Names, feelings, sounds, and specific injuries. My heart grew cold as I read, wondering how she'd come to write those lines. As if she'd thought, I dreamed he broke my fingers and raped me, then searched for those words to add to the memory of breaking and brutality. Oh God. There was far more than I thought she'd remembered, and my first instinct was to call her, to start asking questions. I hesitated a moment, before I realized I should read it through to the end before I started asking anything else. I couldn't call her. I didn't know if she had her phone or even if there was mobile access wherever she was. My questions would have to wait. One page had her handwriting across the top, above the line of bold words. Not in the police transcript. Of all the pages, this one I kept returning to, as if rereading the words would somehow change the past they described. I ripped the page free of its fellows and read it again. Beach stars, sand shot, surf, Chris Nathan numb. I was floating. No pain, nothing holding me down anymore. Something cold touched my face and I opened my eyes slowly. I recoiled from the dark shape hovering over me. "It's okay. I'm just washing your face," said a voice I barely recognized. I shivered in what felt like a cold wind. It couldn't be. I looked around fearfully. I looked up, and saw the contrast of pinprick stars on the darker black of the open sky. "Where are we?" "We're at a beach, out of there, away from them." His voice sounded different, that was why I didn't recognize it immediately. More abrupt, more certain. More authoritative. "There's something I have to do here. You got me out. Thank you, Chris." I felt a surge of joy well up, bringing tears to my eyes, barely able to believe it was possible. He was silent, and I looked at him to see the reason for it. I was shocked to see he held my hands in his. I couldn't feel his touch, and they didn't look like my hands. They were twisted and swollen, dark with blood to well past my wrists. As he held my hands he said, "Can you trust me?" "Okay." I was surprised that he'd bothered to ask, after all that had happened. He suddenly turned to face the dunes, looking worried. "Wait here. I'll be back." He got up and jogged off into the dunes, leaving me alone. "First aid kit," were the only words I could discern as he took off. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. There was no feeling left in my legs, and my hands were numb from the wrists down. I tried to call out, to tell him to wait, not to leave me alone like this, but even my voice wasn't strong enough. Just as I started to panic, I heard footsteps approaching me across the sand. I struggled to sit up, realizing too late as I managed it that I was wrapped in a blanket, which slipped off my shoulders, exposing most of my top half to the freezing wind. I clumsily attempted to pull it back up again with my numb, mangled fingers, but failed miserably. Somehow I collapsed on the sand again, my head spinning. So cold already, I barely felt him rip the blanket away from me and toss it aside. I should have fought, but it was like moving through cold water and I was so tired, so tired. Sadistic prick, I mumbled. I couldn't even feel the pain anymore. I heard a voice, but I didn't care enough to focus on what it meant. I closed my eyes, drifting into sleep. A sharp pain woke me and I cried out, opening my eyes as I struggled to sit up, convinced I'd been stabbed. He pushed me back down, his voice an unintelligible sound that I couldn't focus on, but I fought him now, desperate to see if I'd dreamed it. Then he was gone. A gun in my hands. I couldn't feel it, had to touch it to my face to be sure I had it. End it, I murmured. A gasp. No. Tugging, snapping, took it from me. The gun was gone. Shots. Wake up, Angel. Nathan saying, it's over. Chris. I mumbled. It's all right, he's dead, Nathan replied. 91. I read it for what might have been the 100th time, then dropped the page and closed my eyes. I wanted to erase my memories. I wanted to erase hers. I wanted no one to know what I'd done. But some things can't be undone. I opened my eyes, looking for where the paper had fallen, and realized she'd written something on the back too. Nathan, this is as much as I can remember. If you'd like to talk about it, I'll be at 47 Adelaide Street in Fremantle at 4:30 p.m. next Saturday, 2 weeks after I gave you this. I thought it sounded strange, but I'd go just to see her again. I had so much I wanted to say. Starting with sorry. Coward that I am, I wasn't sure if I could say it all. I started writing it down instead. See, Caitlin? I could document my worst nightmares too. And mine are as real as yours. I sealed them in an envelope, wishing I could seal them as securely inside my head. The week dragged like an insomniac snail, the only bright spot the day the newspaper photo of her arrived. A framed memory of Caitlin smiling at ducklings, as happy as I'd ever seen her. Now I'd never forget either. I turned on the bedside light when I woke up in the dark, just so I could see her face again. On Saturday afternoon, I drove up and down Adelaide Street, looking for the right number. After 3 tries I gave up, parked the car and started walking. I couldn't find the number anyway. So, at 4:30 p.m., I stood outside an old church, which was where number 47 should be. A large wedding party posed for photographs on the steps. I stopped on the footpath, not wanting to get in the photographer's way. I searched the wedding guests for her, scanning faces. The bride was Caitlin's opposite, tall and blonde with bloody big boobs, wearing a blue and white dress with lots of colored pearls. Her husband looked at her as if he was hypnotized by bliss. I bet they'd never had anything but smooth sailing from first kiss through to wedding night. They couldn't have had as hard a time of it as Caitlin and I had. I could count the number of kisses we'd shared, and I didn't dare even mention the possibility of sex. At the happy couple's feet, a grumpy little flower girl in a miniature version of the bride's dress sat pouting at her toy fish on the steps. Most of the guests were Italian, plenty of dark hair, but none of them as beautiful as Caitlin. I couldn't see her anywhere. I took a walk around the church, wondering if I was missing something. The church door was open, with a sign beside it saying, "Reconciliation today." I stepped in through the door, wondering if Caitlin had gone inside. It was dark in the foyer, and while I waited for my eyes to adjust, I felt her fingers close around mine. She guided my hand into some cold water, then helped me draw a cross across my chest, my fingers still dripping. Before I could ask why, she smiled and said in a low voice, "It's a reminder of your baptism, when all the bad things you've done are forgiven." She paused. "Were you christened Nathan?" "I think so," I answered, worried. I was too young to remember, and I don't think I've been in a church much since." She smiled again. "Then perhaps it wouldn't hurt to spend a moment longer in this one?" Maybe she was going to kill me and she didn't want me to die unforgiven, I thought in mounting panic. Did I have the right to deny her that? I couldn't deny what I'd done. A calm spread across my mind as I didn't care anymore. She was entitled to any compensation she wanted to exact from me. I owed her far more than I could ever give. She led me inside the church proper, into one of the pews close to the back. Her steps were light again, almost dancing like the first time I'd seen her. She wore a white cotton dress with light blue flowers on it. "Were you christened?" I asked her. She laughed. "Oh yes, First Communion, confirmation, the works. Dad made sure I was brought up a good little Catholic girl." She knelt down, looking at the front of the church instead of me. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized we were alone in the church. I ached to touch her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to disturb her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope that held what I needed to tell her. The words I could never seem to say. I leaned down and slipped it into her bag, praying that she didn't open it until I was out of reach. Maybe after she'd read it and cooled down a little, she'd speak to me again. Maybe even forgive me, at least a little. I jumped at a sudden sound. Someone came in behind us, walked up the aisle and then stepped through an open door to the side, closing it behind him. He didn't even glance at us. I hoped he hadn't seen me with my hand in Caitlin's bag. I looked askance at Caitlin, but she still knelt, looking at the front of the church or praying for all I knew. "He's going to reconciliation, Nathan," she said suddenly. "He'll express how sorry he is for the bad things he's done, and the priest will tell him that God forgives him for them. Sometimes you have to do a penance for them too." She still wouldn't look at me. I felt chilled. She was going to kill me, and my last words would be in that letter. Oh, confession. You want me to go in there with a priest and confess all the bad things I've done? If you like. She grinned at me suddenly, looking like the cat who'd stolen the fillet steak. I have. I started to shake my head, knowing one of the last things I wanted to do right now was tell some stranger about the bad things I'd done. I could barely tell her what she already knew. A sudden thought distracted me. "What sort of things do you have to confess to?" I asked. "When I was at school we were taught not to ask anyone that question because it's not polite," she admonished me, turning back to look at the front of the church. I thought she'd finished, but after a pause she continued, "Killing people isn't exactly condoned, and I think lying to police and perjury are considered sins, regardless of the reasons for them." I haven't. I began, then changed what I was going to say. "I don't have anything I want to tell a priest." "You never told anyone about him, did you? You said I killed him in self-defense." Caitlin's eyes were dark pools pointed at me. "I don't think it's a God's forgiveness you want," she said carefully. "At school, the teacher drummed into us that reconciliation wasn't so much about what you'd done or what you'd failed to do, but how you were sorry for it and intended to make amends." I didn't know what to say. I'd known this time would come and I dreaded telling her the truth. That's why I wrote it down, so I'd know I said it all, even if I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. They'd flowed through my fingers far more easily. I'd kept putting it off in the hope that maybe it wouldn't happen. Maybe she'd never remember it all. Fucking stupid hope. She'd never forgotten any of it. I fell to my knees. "Caitlin, I'm so sorry." She turned her big dark sad eyes on me. They shone in the last rays of sunlight streaming through the high window as they filled with tears. "Chris. Why did you do it, Nathan?" I took a deep breath. It didn't help. It was my job to watch them kidnap someone and get out with the witness. But I couldn't. My voice failed and I tried again. "I didn't know what they'd done to you until that night on the beach. Then it was too late. I'd let them hurt you like that and I hadn't done a thing to stop them." "Why did you kill him?" Her voice shook as she said it. I hesitated, not even sure of the answer to this myself anymore. I thought it was for Alana, or even for me. Maybe it was for you. I just couldn't let him live, knowing what he did and what I didn't. How I'd failed. It felt like my entire digestive tract was so heavy it had dropped out of me onto the floor at my feet, taking my voice with it, leaving a gaping hole where my guts used to be. She knew. Her voice was sad and calm. Why me, Nathan? Why did they choose me? I couldn't meet her eyes. I couldn't take my eyes off you. She saw and picked you. Out of the hundreds of people walking down the terrace that day, they picked you. And I couldn't stop them. A tear stood bright on her cheek, but she wiped it away. I think you have a lot to answer for. What you put me through can't be undone, but you helped me recover from it. You even saved my life. Maybe one day I'll be able to forgive you for it. Suddenly she rose and walked out of the church. Wait. Please. I hurried to follow her out. When she stopped, it was so sudden that I almost bumped into her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't say it enough. She turned to face me, so close I could feel the warmth of her body not quite touching me. She slid an arm around my waist to steady herself as she stretched up onto her toes. She reached up with her other hand to my throat, her fingers moving up in a slow caress to my cheek, where she stopped. The heel of her hand was under my chin, her fingers curved up around my cheek. Forgiven, she breathed before she gave me a lingering kiss. My heart ached in a void daring to beat in hope. Tell her about the letter. She stepped back and looked up at me, a sad smile on her face. Goodbye, Nathan. In despair, I wondered if there was anything I could say to change her mind. I love you, I whispered, realizing I meant it. She didn't hear. Her light dancing step carried her into the evening cafe crowd and out of my sight. Caitlin never looked back. I couldn't leave. I couldn't make myself move. I couldn't stand to shift from the spot where Caitlin had kissed me so sweetly for what might have been the last time. She knew. Dusk faded to darkness and still I stood, wishing, hoping, praying that she'd read the letter and return. She said she'd forgiven me. Out of the darkness, I heard a live band in one of the nearby pubs start their first set, covering a Powderfinger song. Who will lift you up? Lifting her up when she was unconscious, on the beach, on the road outside the ambulance, in the hospital. Even now my arms felt empty without her. You fool! Bloodied handprints on the quilt, a silent scream, running. No. Don't think it. Go watch your back. Her pulling me down as the gunshot echoed in the dark night. She'd saved my life. Oh God, she knew in the TV interview, and she never said anything either. 2 weeks ago with the police, fuck. She was protecting me. At the end. End it. Her whisper in the TV studio. Her lying on the beach, her eyes on me as she held a gun to her own head. Agonizing memory that haunted my nightmares. Who would be there to protect her if they found her? She'd turn the weapon on herself before she'd let them take her back. A fall down at your... Trying to help her, in hospital, on the beach, on the road by the ambulance as the blood pooled beneath her. A fall down at your... Here in the church, begging for her forgiveness, when I should have been begging her to stay with me. A fall down at your feet? Did he have a fucking stutter? On my knees on the dull grey concrete outside a church, I was angry at a stupid singer I couldn't even see. The letter. Fuck the letter. I staggered to my feet. I had to find her. I needed to know.